Hello, everyone, and welcome to the place where shadows whisper and nightmares softly breathe. So close your eyes, take a slow breath. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where you from and what time are you watching? Let's get comfortable and relax.
Story 1. I never should have gone back to the house on Wren Hollow Road, but something in the old walls kept calling to me, pulling my mind backward like fingers clawing through the soil of memory. And as soon as I stepped onto the rotted porch with its warped floorboards and air thick with mildew and wet leaves, I felt that unnatural pressure behind my eyes. The same one I used to feel when I was 12 and my uncle took us there after the funeral, swearing it would only be for a while, just a few nights until things settled. Just a place to sleep away the storm of lawyers and hospitals and death. But even as a child I felt it, that silent scream hidden under the wallpaper and beams, something breathing between the cracks. And I remember lying awake with my little brother, both of us curled on that ancient couch with stuffing spilling from its ribs, listening to the whispers that came not from the wind, but from somewhere deeper, like the walls were remembering things they weren't supposed to. And my brother told me in a cracked whisper that something walked through the hall at night, dragging one foot like it didn't know how to use it anymore. Something that muttered in broken words we didn't understand. And we both heard the footsteps but told ourselves it was the house settling, or our imaginations, or maybe Uncle Roy who never seemed to sleep. Always pacing with his eyes wide and glassy and his mouth moving silently, like he was praying or arguing with something we couldn't see. And after 3 nights, he told us never to open the basement door, never even to touch the knob. Said there were things in the deep of this house that hadn't stopped moving since the foundation was poured, things that didn't belong to the earth anymore, but still hungered for warm voices and breathing skin. And I remember the way he trembled as he said it, not like a man trying to scare kids, but like someone confessing something shameful and true. And I remember the blood on his wrists when he forgot to lock the bathroom door. How he insisted it was an accident and screamed when I tried to clean the wounds. But then the 4th night came and I woke up alone on that couch, the blanket soaked with some foul-smelling fluid I couldn't identify, and I found my brother standing at the basement door, his small hand resting on the knob, eyes vacant, whispering something to whatever was on the other side, something that whispered back in a language I still hear in my dreams. And when I yanked him away, he screamed like something had torn from his throat and ran into the woods outside barefoot. And we didn't find him until morning, his feet shredded and bleeding, mumbling that he had seen Mom and Dad in the trees, their faces gray and smiling, and their eyes made of static. And after that he stopped talking completely and just stared at the corners of rooms with a look that made me sick in my stomach. And Uncle Roy wouldn't speak of it, and burned sage in every room, and nailed shut the closet doors, even the ones in the hallway, even the little ones no taller than a child, muttering that the house was waking again and he didn't know how long the nails would hold. But on the 7th day, he disappeared completely, leaving behind a note that only said, "I'm sorry I fed it. I'm sorry I taught it your names." And they never found him, never found a trace of him or the old truck or even footprints, just the lingering smell of sulfur and the basement door wide open, even though he'd nailed it shut with 3-inch spikes and a steel bar across the frame. And when the police came, they blamed it all on stress and grief, said I was confused, and told my brother's therapist that children often make up stories to cope. Even when I showed them the notebook I found in the attic full of drawings and symbols and dates stretching back to 1892. Even when I showed them the name, Wren Hollow, etched again and again into the wood of the floor beneath the attic dust, always with the same phrase beneath, "We are what it needs to remember." And eventually they moved us, put us in foster care, gave us pills to stop the nightmares, and my brother never spoke again, not even once, and he never blinked right, always too slow, like something behind his eyes was still waking up. And he killed himself when he was 24 by throwing himself in front of a train without leaving a note. But I found a carved word under his bedsheets that said, "hungry," and that's when I knew I had to go back, had to see if it was real or if my mind had finally broken completely. And now that I'm here, now that I've opened that cursed door again, I know I was right. Because the basement isn't a basement anymore. It's a hallway that stretches far beyond the foundation of the house. A pulsing tunnel of roots and breathing wood and bone-colored walls that shift when I look directly at them. and the air smells like blood and seawater and something older than language, and I can hear it ahead, waiting, the same voice that called to my brother, the same one that sang to my uncle in his sleep and drove him into the arms of whatever unmade things lurk below. And I walk because I must, not out of courage, but because I feel something behind me, something with teeth made of clicking nails and eyes that reflect the face of whoever looks into them. And I realize too late that the story never ended, that it's been chewing through my memories like mold, rewriting my past with each step I take, because now I can't remember what my parents looked like or what my brother's real name was. Just the sound of his breathing at night and the way he whispered back to the dark. And now I hear my own voice ahead in the blackness, echoing my thoughts, laughing and crying and calling me forward, promising answers if I just keep walking, just keep giving. And the hallway gets narrower, tighter, warmer, more alive. And the walls begin to pulse with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. And I can feel it listening, feel it learning, and I understand now that I was never meant to leave Wren Hollow Road, that I've been walking in this house my whole life, just pacing the outer edge of something ancient and empty that needs people to remember it so it can become real again. And my words, this story, these memories, they are not warnings but offerings. Food for a starving shape that once was a house and now is something else entirely, something that waits for others to read this and feel the same pull I did. Because the house needs names, needs voices, and the moment you think of it, the moment the phrase Wren Hollow Road enters your mind, it finds the path to you, and the basement door creaks open wherever you are. And now that you've read this, you will hear the whispers too, and you will smell the mildew, and one day you will find yourself standing at a door you don't remember building, a door that's always been in your home, and you'll feel your hand reaching for the knob, not because you want to, but because the house remembers you. Story 2. I don't know where to begin or if I even should, but my hands won't stop shaking, and there's something wrong with the way the shadows move at night now, like they know what I did, or maybe what I found, or maybe they were always watching. Maybe I just started noticing them after the night in the field, because I don't think things were wrong before that night, and I don't think I was ever supposed to see what I saw or hear what I heard, and I swear to you, if I could erase the memory or trade it for madness, I would, because at least madness doesn't stare back from the window at 3:17 a.m. every single night with the same empty smile and hollow stare that it had when it first rose from the dirt beneath that tree, the old one, the one that even the locals don't talk about, the one that doesn't lose its leaves even in the dead of winter, the one that feels older than the ground around it, and the one the birds never land in and animals never approach. And I know how that sounds, but I saw it, and I stood there like a fool thinking it was some kind of prank or hidden camera thing or art project, but no art ever smelled like that, like rot and old meat and wet iron and the kind of cold that burns your lungs from the inside. And the sound, my God, the sound, like breathing that comes from beneath the ground, like something buried so deep it's forgotten how to be human, but still remembers the shape of people and mimics them like a child trying to draw a face for the first time. Wrong. And lopsided and twitching in ways muscles shouldn't twitch, and it came out of the ground with no struggle, like the earth opened for it willingly, like it had been waiting, like it had been promised something or someone, and it wasn't until it stood and turned its face toward me that I realized it was wearing someone's skin, and it was still wet and sagging in places, and the eyes didn't blink and sink, and its mouth opened, but nothing came out at first, just the faint sound of cracking like dry wood, splintering, and then it said my name, but it wasn't my name the way anyone says it. It was the way my mother used to whisper it when she thought I was asleep. The exact tone and inflection, the exact breathy hush, and I ran. I dropped the flashlight. I scraped my palms on the rocks and the frozen roots, and I didn't stop until I reached the road. And even then I didn't feel safe, because I swear the shadows were longer, darker, watching, and I could feel that same smell trailing behind me like invisible fingers brushing against my back. And I didn't sleep that night. I just sat with every light in the house on, staring at the trees at the edge of the property, and the whole time I could still hear it saying my name in that too familiar voice, like it was just waiting for me to come back, or maybe for night to fall again. Because when it did, I heard the knock, not on the door, not on the windows, but on the wall from inside the house. 3 knocks, slow and patient and hollow like bone, against plaster, and I knew then that I hadn't just seen something. I brought something back with me, or maybe it had marked me, or maybe the tree did. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore except that it's been 4 days since that night, and every night the knocks come earlier, and now they're louder and closer, and I can't sleep, because when I do I dream of dirt and roots wrapping around my legs and pulling me down into the ground where it waits. Smiling, always smiling, and in the dream I can't scream because the soil fills my throat, and I wake up gagging on air that tastes like copper and mold, and I think it's inside the house now because I hear breathing when I'm alone and the lights flicker when I say its name, but the problem is I don't know its name. I just know it knows mine, and that's enough for it to find me again and again, and I tried to leave town, but the engine died as soon as I hit the edge of the forest, and the road behind me was gone. Not like it disappeared. Like it had never existed at all, and even the GPS said no location found. And my phone just keeps displaying this same notification in a language I can't read, like symbols scratched into stone, and even when I turned the phone off, it turned back on by itself, and the battery never drains, and I swear it's watching me through the screen, learning my face, my voice, the way I breathe and move and think, and I know this sounds insane, but I'm not. Not yet. I know what I saw. I know what I brought back, and I know what it wants because last night it stood in my hallway, just out of reach of the light, and it held out something in its hand, something small and dark and wet. Story 2. I don't know where to begin or if I even should, but my hands won't stop shaking, and there's something wrong with the way the shadows move at night now, like they know what I did, or maybe what I found, or maybe they were always watching. Maybe I just started noticing them after the night in the field, because I don't think things were wrong before that night, and I don't think I was ever supposed to see what I saw or hear what I heard, and I swear to you, if I could erase the memory or trade it for madness, I would, because at least madness doesn't stare back from the window at 3:17 a.m. every single night with the same empty smile and hollow stare that it had when it first rose from the dirt beneath that tree, the old one, the one that even the locals don't talk about, the one that doesn't lose its leaves even in the dead of winter, the one that feels older than the ground around it, and the one the birds never land in and animals never approach. And I know how that sounds, but I saw it, and I stood there like a fool thinking it was some kind of prank or hidden camera thing or art project, but no art ever smelled like that, like rot and old meat and wet iron and the kind of cold that burns your lungs from the inside. And the sound, my God, the sound, like breathing that comes from beneath the ground, like something buried so deep it's forgotten how to be human, but still remembers the shape of people and mimics them like a child trying to draw a face for the first time. Wrong, and lopsided and twitching in ways muscles shouldn't twitch, and it came out of the ground with no struggle, like the earth opened for it willingly, like it had been waiting, like it had been promised something or someone, and it wasn't until it stood and turned its face toward me that I realized it was wearing someone's skin, and it was still wet and sagging in place. Story 3. I didn't mean to go back to that house, not after what happened to my cousin Liam in the fall of 1998 when we were only 12. Not after the police never found anything but blood smeared on the floor and a hole clawed through the basement door as though some desperate animal had tried to escape from inside rather than break into it. Not after his voice kept echoing in my dreams for years begging me to bring it back. But curiosity is a slow poison and guilt is an anchor soaked in tar. And so, when my mother passed and I found that rusted key tucked into her Bible, yes, the same crooked old brass one with the hollowed-out head and the strange rune scratched into the shaft that I saw Liam steal from my grandfather's coat pocket the day he vanished, I knew I had no choice but to return to that rotting wreck of a farmhouse curled up like a spider in the deep woods past Briar Hollow, past the stream where the water ran black in the fall and foamed red in the spring, past the crumbled stone marker with the words Mortis Vigilant etched faintly into its moss-eaten face, past everything I once knew and loved and thought was safe. And when I got there, the house looked worse than it ever did, tilted like it had been punched by the wind. Its chimney leaning like a crooked finger pointing nowhere, the shingles curling like dried tongues, and the door still chained shut even though we both knew chains never kept out what lived underneath. The key fit too perfectly into the rusted lock, and the chain slithered off like it had been waiting to be freed. And the smell that oozed out was the same coppery sweet rot that haunted the back of my throat since I was 12, and saw the black thing lurch past the basement window just after Liam screamed for the final time. And still I stepped in because something tugged at the strings of my ribs, some invisible hand reaching from within the floorboards and flicking its nail across my heart like a coin across glass, and inside the air was damp. and too warm, heavy with something that didn't want to be named, and the house creaked not like wood but like something breathing. Something holding its breath as I passed into the hallway with the sagging wallpaper and the photos that had long since bled to sepia shadows where our ancestors' faces should have been, and at the end of the hallway was the door, the one that always stayed locked. The one that Liam said led nowhere even though we both knew it went down, always down, even though we swore never to open it again, but it was already open, cracked just enough for the dark to leak out, not like absence of light but like a thing, like ink alive and thinking, and from the depths of it I heard something like breathing but wetter, thicker, like lungs clogged with mud, and then I heard my name in a voice I hadn't heard in 26 years, Liam's voice, not how he sounded at 12, but older, rawer, scraped down to bone, whispering, "It's not done yet," and before I could stop myself, my foot was on the first step, and then the second, and then I was descending, each wooden step groaning like it resented me, the air tightening like hands around my throat, and the deeper I went the more I felt like I was shrinking. Not just physically but spiritually, like something was peeling off layers of me with every breath, until I reached the basement and found the door that had never been there before, slick and pulsing like meat, veined and wet and warm to the touch, and when I pressed my hand against it, it opened not by swinging but by parting, tearing open with a sound like a scream inhaled in reverse, and what was beyond wasn't a room but a space that didn't belong in our world, an expanse of impossible angles and shifting, whispering shadows that twitched when I looked at them too long, and the floor beneath was soft, yielding, like a tongue or a bed of worms, and the walls throbbed in time with my heartbeat like I'd been swallowed by something old and hungry. And at the center of it was Liam, or what was left of him, hunched and wrong and eyeless, his body stretched thin and twitching like a puppet left in the rain, whispering over and over, "We fed it, but it wants more." And I tried to back away, but the floor rose up around my feet and held me fast, and from the walls came hands, too many and too long, pale and slick and fingerless, pressing against me like a lover's embrace gone cold, and then I saw what lay at the center. What Liam had been feeding, what we'd summoned all those years ago with the key and the book and the ritual we thought was just a game, and it was a mouth, nothing but a vast, lipless mouth in the earth, ringed with teeth like broken glass and whispering my name in every voice I'd ever heard. And it spoke to me without words, pouring its hunger directly into my skull, telling me that the house had been built not as shelter but as gateway, that our bloodline had been shaped over centuries like a key itself, forged by fate to one day unlock this prison and offer it a way out. And I saw visions then, our grandfather kneeling in the cellar with his eyes sewn shut, our great-grandmother birthing something that never cried but smiled with too many teeth. All of us connected by this thing that wasn't a god and wasn't a demon but something older, a concept that learned how to chew. And as the mouth opened wider, I felt the pieces of me unraveling like yarn and fire, my memories peeling away like skin, my will caving like wet paper, and just before it could consume me, I saw Liam's hand reach out and press something cold and metallic into mine, the key, the real one, the one that locked the gate and sealed it with blood, and he screamed at me to run and never look back. To bury the key where no one would find it and forget his name, and somehow I tore free, the walls shrieking in protest, the basement collapsing into itself as I climbed the stairs 3 at a time with the mouths howling, growing fainter behind me, until I burst into the daylight that wasn't daylight but the sick yellow glow of dusk, and the house was gone, utterly vanished, leaving only a ring of scorched earth and a circle of ash with my footprints the only marks breaking it. And I did bury the key in the woods behind the church, wrapped in salt-soaked cloth and bound in barbed wire, and I never spoke of this again until now because last night I woke to find that same key on my pillow, slick with something that wasn't blood but smelled like the basement, and I heard Liam's voice again, just a whisper behind my ear, saying, "You locked the door, but you left the window open." Story 4. They told me not to buy the house at the end of the lane. They whispered about it in ways that made them sound like they'd all rehearsed the same dream too many times, like something old and half-swallowed was stuck in their throats every time they said, "Don't go up there." And I should have listened, should have walked away, but I was so tired of renting and drifting and answering to landlords who never fixed the mold creeping down the bathroom walls. So when the listing came up and I saw the price, far too cheap for the size, the land, the silence around it, I bit down on my skepticism and signed the papers like a fool, offering up my own name to something hungry, something waiting. And the moment the key touched my palm, I felt it. That thin little charge through the bones of my fingers, like I'd just shaken hands with someone wearing dead skin. But I smiled anyway because it was mine, And when I moved in, it was just quiet, no furniture, just my boxes and that dry, brittle smell of something abandoned. And it wasn't until the second night that I heard the first voice, not words, not really, more like breath being pulled through teeth, but not my breath. And I live alone, always have, and I should have run. I know that now. But back then I told myself it was just the house settling, some draft from the attic, except the sound was under the floor, not above it. And I don't have a basement. I checked the blueprints, I checked them twice, and I even knocked on the floor in every room like a madman listening for hollows. But all I got was the dull, stubborn echo of what that didn't want to speak. But that night it happened again, the sound sharper this time, like nails dragged across the underside of the planks beneath my bed. And I got up and slept on the couch with all the lights on, except sometime around 3. I opened my eyes and every bulb had gone dark at once, not a pop, not a flicker, just black, like the house had blinked, and I sat there in the dark too, afraid to breathe. And then I saw it, not a shape, not a person, just a wrongness in the space near the hallway, like the air was folding the wrong way, like something had pressed against the world and left a dent in it. And it didn't move, not toward me, not away, just waited. And I must have passed out or something because I woke up the next morning with the lights back on and my heart running like a trapped animal in my chest. And I should have left. I packed a bag and stood by the door and told myself just walk away, leave everything, leave now. But I didn't. I put the bag down and convinced myself again. Told myself grief makes you see things, that maybe it was stress or loneliness or too much wine. But that was before I found the crawl space. Before the house opened its mouth, because 3 days later I was looking for my screwdriver set, swearing I'd left it in the hall closet. And when I moved a box, I found a seam in the wall I hadn't noticed before, thin, like a scar. But when I pressed it, it opened, and behind it was a narrow black crawl space I swear wasn't on any plan. Wasn't there before, it was just there now, like it had grown there, or been waiting to be found. And I should have shut it and walked away, but I didn't. I grabbed a flashlight and crawled in, and the further I went, the colder it got, and the walls were damp and soft in ways drywall shouldn't be. And I thought I heard a voice, a real voice this time, faint and familiar, and it said my name, over and over, in the voice of my mother, who died 6 years ago. And I kept going, knees scraping against something that felt like meat. And then I dropped the flashlight and everything went black. And in that darkness, something breathed next to my face and whispered, "You're finally home." And I panicked, backed out as fast as I could, came out bruised and shaking and bleeding from my palms like the walls had teeth. And I nailed that panel shut and left the house that day, stayed in a motel for a week. But the dreams followed me, and in every dream the crawl space was open, wider, and something inside was calling me back. Something that wore my mother's voice like a mask made of wet cloth, and every time I woke up I felt closer to it, like it was leaking out of the walls of my skull. And one morning I woke up in the motel bathtub, water running, mouth full of dirt, and I knew I'd sleepwalked, or something worse, and still I went back, because some part of me wanted to hear her voice again. Even if it wasn't her, even if it was just a lie with teeth. And when I returned, the house felt warmer, like it was pleased, like something deep in the walls had been waiting. And that night the crawl space was open again, not just open, but yawning, edges peeled back like skin around a wound. And the voice was louder now, not just her, but others too. People I'd lost, people I never told anyone about, all of them singing a name I didn't recognize but understood belonged to me now. And I crawled in, not because I wanted to, but because I had to, because my bones were bending toward it like magnets to rust. And this time it was deeper, the tunnel was wet, breathing, and I swear I could feel veins pulsing under my hands. And I crawled for what felt like hours, until I wasn't sure if I was in the house or under it or inside something else entirely. And then I saw it, the heart, if you can call it that, vast and beating and made of rooms and teeth and eyes, and hanging from its ceiling were dozens of people, or what used to be people, their mouths stretched open, whispering in voices that weren't theirs. And they all looked at me, all at once, and said, "You were the last." And then I felt it, the house, this thing, closing behind me, sealing me in. And I don't know how long I've been here, writing this on the back of old receipts and scraps of boxes I find in the walls. But the walls move now, they breathe, and sometimes they let me hear the world outside, just to remind me what I lost. And I know you won't believe this, but if you ever find the house at the end of the lane and someone offers you the key, run. Because once it has your name, it never lets go, and the crawl space always remembers. Story 5. They told me the forest was haunted, not in the way children giggle about ghost stories around campfires or in the way bored teenagers dare each other into dilapidated cabins with cracked windows and mildew-choked walls, but in the way where entire families disappear without a single trace, where hikers step between the trees and are never seen again, where even the police who searched the perimeter felt something brushing against their minds like the cold. Wet fingers of something not quite real and not quite dead, and yet I went. Because I didn't believe in stories, I believed in proof, and proof meant walking into the dark and seeing what stared back from it. So I packed my gear, took the old trailhead past Miller's Creek, past the rusted signs warning about landslides and unstable ground and wild animals, though no one ever saw a single wild animal there. Not even the prints, not even the waste, just stillness and rot and the wind that always seemed to blow the wrong direction. And I stepped off the known path and into the part of the woods the locals refused to name, the part where the trees didn't just grow, they loomed, twisted, with branches that curled like reaching hands and bark that seemed to flake away in patterns that almost resembled words or symbols or names scratched over and over again in desperation. And the deeper I went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no bugs, not even the whisper of squirrels in the brush, only my own breath and the crunch of leaf mold beneath my boots and that strange sensation that the shadows were watching, not because of paranoia or fear, but because they were. I knew they were. Not like eyes behind bushes or the quiet rustle of something creeping near, but more like the space between the trees noticed me, like it recognized my shape and remembered me from somewhere I couldn't place, and I told myself I was fine, that it was all adrenaline and imagination. But that logic cracked when I passed the old campsite. They said belonged to the Gray family, the ones who vanished in 1998, and their tents were still there, collapsed but intact, plastic faded and frayed but not rotted, food containers still unopened, sleeping bags unrolled as if someone had just stepped out for a moment and never returned, and there was no sign of struggle, no blood, no claw marks, just absence, the kind that wrapped around your spine and whispered, you could vanish too, and I should have turned around. I should have run, but I didn't, because I saw something deeper in the trees, a flicker of movement, not a person, not exactly, more like a silhouette trying to wear the idea of a person like a costume, tall and narrow and shifting, like smoke held in the shape of a man, and it beckoned. And I followed, because something in my brain, some deep root of curiosity or madness, needed to know, and the deeper I went, the more the forest changed, the trees blackened as if burned but without ash, and the sky above darkened. Even though it was only noon, and the air grew thick and wet and tasted of iron and mildew, and I found others, old campsites, old belongings, children's toys half buried in moss, cameras long dead but with cracked film spools scattered around, and bones, small bones. Bird bones, squirrel bones, not human, at least not at first, but then I saw a ribcage too large, too symmetrical, with clothes rotted around it and teeth still clenched in a silent scream, and the moment I turned away, I heard my name whispered, my name, not from a throat, not from a mouth, but from all around, from inside my own skull, like the forest knew me, wanted me, and I ran. I tried to run, but the trees had moved. I swear they had. The path behind me was gone. And the forest was denser now, tighter, every limb and vine reaching just a little too far, brushing against my face like fingers trying to remember, and I pushed forward, thinking maybe if I reached the center, because I could feel there was a center, I could make it out, and I came to a clearing where the air was wrong, not still, but dead, and in the center was a circle of stones arranged like an altar, and on it was me, not a mirror, not a hallucination, but me, my backpack, my jacket. My face twisted in silent agony, and I don't remember walking toward it, I don't remember kneeling, but I was, and the thing that wore smoke like skin stepped out from behind the stones, and it had no eyes, no face, just hollowness that ached, and it reached into my chest without touching me and pulled, not my heart, not blood, but something, and I collapsed, but didn't die, not fully, because my body rose without me, and my skin wore it, and now I'm here, in the woods, not a ghost, not alive, watching, waiting, whispering to the next fool who doesn't believe in stories. Story 6. I don't know if this is the kind of thing anyone would ever believe or even should believe, but I need to write it down because if I don't, I'm afraid I'll stop believing it myself, and I'll start thinking I'm crazy or that the night that chewed through the seams of my life never happened. Even though I still wake up drenched in sweat every morning with the scent of wet dirt and decay clinging to my throat and the echo of the whispers crawling through the corners of my ears like spider legs. Brushing against the drums of my sanity, and it started in the most ordinary way because it always does, doesn't it? When evil is real, when something truly awful is burrowing under the skin of the world. It never announces itself with lightning and screams, but with little things, subtle things, and in my case, it started with a smell in the wall, just this faint sweetness like rotting fruit, like something dying behind the drywall, and I thought maybe it was a rat, or mold, or maybe something stupid like a bird that got in through the attic and couldn't get out, and I ignored it for days until I started hearing the thumping sounds, soft at first, like something falling or shifting just once or twice in the night. But they started getting louder and coming more frequently, and I swore to myself that it was just the house settling, or that I was dreaming it. But then came the voices, not words at first, no, more like breathy murmurs, like the sound of wind pressing against glass in a way that mimics human speech, almost like a trick, but not quite, because late one night I woke up and I heard it whispering behind the wall, not through it, not from another room, but behind my headboard, from the inside of the wall, and it said my name. Not just once, but over and over, Clay, 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 and it sounded like a woman's voice but strangled, like it was gargling on dirt, and I jumped up and pulled my bed away and pressed my ear to the drywall, and I heard scratching, light, like fingernails brushing just beneath the surface, and I don't know what made me do it, but I took a hammer from the closet and started chipping away at the wall until I cracked it open, and there was nothing there, just insulation and darkness and an old rusted pipe. But the smell that came out of that hole was like rot and soil and something long dead, and I patched the hole, but I didn't sleep that night, and in the morning, I called a pest control guy who came and poked around and said he didn't see any sign of rats or bugs or nests or anything, and said maybe I had a dead animal in the wall somewhere and that it would dry out and stop stinking in a few days. But the thing is, the smell moved, and the next night I smelled it in the hallway. And the thumping came again, not from the wall this time, but from under the floor, like someone crawling around beneath the floorboards. And I swear I saw something out of the corner of my eye when I turned toward the sound, a shadow that didn't move like shadows should, like it was attached to something alive and writhing, and the light started flickering, and I started losing time, like whole hours just gone. Like I'd blink and suddenly it was 4 hours later, and I'd be in a different room without remembering how I got there. And the whispers got bolder, clearer. They started saying things like he brought her back, and she never left, and the roots remember her, and I didn't understand any of it until I started digging into the history of the house and found out that the land it was built on used to be the site of an old farmhouse that burned down in the 1950s after the youngest daughter disappeared, and the mother went mad and started digging holes in the field looking for her daughter's body, whispering that the trees had taken her, that the trees had fed on her. And one day the mother walked into the woods and never came out, and the fire started a few days later, and they never found the little girl or the mother's body, just blackened ruins and half-buried bones in the fields. And for some reason they built my house right on top of where the farmhouse's cellar used to be, and I thought maybe the scratching, the thumping, maybe it was just some trapped animal, but deep down I knew. I knew it was her, or something that used to be her. And one night I decided to break through the floor in the hallway where the sounds were loudest, and under the boards I found old stone steps, ancient and dry, leading down into darkness. And I didn't want to go down there, but I also couldn't stop myself. Like something had slipped into my thoughts and was nudging me forward like a cold hand pressing gently against the small of my back. And I took a flashlight and went down those steps. And what I saw I can't fully explain because the light didn't work properly down there. Like it flickered even though the batteries were new. And the air was thick with that smell, sweet, foul, hungry, and the walls were covered in these black roots pulsing like veins. And when I reached the bottom of the stairs I saw her, or something that looked like her. A little girl in a white dress covered in mud with hair hanging in front of her face. But when she turned to look at me, her eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just voids, and her mouth opened, but didn't move like a human mouth. It unfolded wider than it should have, and she screamed, but it wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a pressure inside my skull like my brain was being chewed by ants. And I fell and dropped the flashlight, and everything went dark except for the dim red glow coming from behind her, from a hole in the wall. And I crawled away, crawled back up those stairs with her laughter echoing behind me like rusted bells, and I sealed the hole. I nailed it shut. I poured concrete over it. I even moved my bed out of that room and started sleeping on the couch, but it doesn't matter because she's not down there anymore. She's everywhere. In the mirrors, in the water, in the trees outside my window that scrape their fingers against the glass at night like they're calling to her. And I see her sometimes when I close my eyes, staring at me from the inside of my mind, whispering things I don't want to understand. Things like he gave her to the roots, and the roots gave her back. And I know now she wasn't buried, she was planted, and she's grown into something else, something deeper, and it's too late because she's in me now, in my thoughts, in my skin. And every night I dream of soil and bones and the sound of her laughter in the dark. And I'm afraid that one day I'll stop being afraid and I'll go back down there and kneel in the dirt and let the roots open my chest and take me home. Story 7. They told me the house would whisper if I stayed long enough. And like an idiot drawn to flame and folklore, I stayed. I watched the walls shift at dusk, felt the light drain from the rooms as though the structure itself fed on brightness, on presence. And I heard the first whisper the second night, a dry rustle like fabric dragged over a grave. But when I turned, nothing was there. Only the cold space where the air grew thick and viscous like water turned old and rotten, and I laughed. Pretending bravery, claiming the stories were wind and warped timber, but the laugh was hollow in my throat because my skin prickled in that sick, unmistakable way that tells your bones someone is watching even when your eyes scream otherwise. So I stayed near the door that night, arms crossed, heart ticking too loudly, and at midnight the house moaned. Not the wind, not pipes, but a moan with weight and intention, a sound of grief and hunger intertwined, rising from the crawl space beneath the floorboards I had not dared to pry open. And though I tried to sleep, every time I closed my eyes I saw a face that wasn't mine behind my lids, pale and featureless and twitching with something too fast and wrong to belong to muscle, like it was made of static-wearing skin. And it grew clearer with every blink, until by morning I knew the house wasn't haunted in the classic way. No ghost slamming doors or dragging chains, no tragic backstory about a woman in white, but instead a living, breathing hunger that grew more aware of me with every breath I took beneath its roof. And on the third night, I found my reflection wasn't quite right, not a funhouse error, not a trick of light, but an intentional deviation. My reflection's eyes didn't blink when mine did. Its lips moved without sound when mine were still, and when I leaned closer it leaned too far, its head dipping just enough to show the back of its skull splitting slightly, like it was unfolding, like it was wearing me like a costume it didn't know how to zip up all the way, and I screamed and fell back, and the mirror cracked slightly, not from contact, but as though it flinched, as though the thing inside hated being seen for what it was, and I packed my things. I really did. I threw my bags into the car and turned the key and heard the engine cough and die with the smell of scorched meat pouring from the vents. And when I opened the hood, there was something wet pressed against the battery, like a heartbeat, wrapped in black tar, pulsing once as if to say no. And I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, the weight of something bigger than the house pressing down, like the entire sky had dropped just for me. And I realized then I wasn't trapped by the house, but in it, part of it now, like blood in its veins. And it had learned my voice, because I began hearing myself whispering in the attic, soft laughter in my cadence from the basement, my voice crooning lullabies I didn't know the lyrics to. And I locked myself in the guest room and stuffed the keyhole and vents and tried not to sleep, tried not to dream. But when exhaustion broke me, I dreamed of being underground, not buried, no, but rooted, my limbs stretching into dirt, my eyes blind and still seeing, tasting worms and rot and memory on my tongue. And when I woke, my fingernails were packed with soil, my mouth dry and sweet with the tang of things that had never lived, and I found symbols carved into my skin with precision too clean for a blade, perfect circles and crosses that hummed when I touched them, like they weren't meant for flesh but for stone. And the house felt warmer after that, satisfied, like it had tasted enough of me to keep a peace, but not all, not yet. And on the sixth day, the windows showed nothing but more of the room I stood in, like reflections caught in a loop. And when I pressed my hand to the glass, I felt another hand press back from the other side, but it was behind mine, as if it had always been. There, waiting, and that night the walls bled not red but black, syrupy tears from the corners where the ceiling met the floor, and the whispers became voices, and the voices became mine, hundreds of me whispering over each other in words I didn't know I knew. Each syllable thick and wrong and true, and my eyes wept that same black ichor, and my breath fogged in the warmth, and my thoughts weren't just mine anymore, because I remembered things I hadn't lived, rituals performed in this house. Before it had walls, offerings made not to gods but to it, the thing beneath, The hunger that built the house around itself to trick flesh into stepping willingly into its mouth. And I realized too late that it didn't need to chase me or break me. It needed me to understand, to consent by knowing, and I did. I knew it now, knew the way its name curled behind the heart and made you hum it without sound, how it bloomed in silence and needed only awareness to thrive, and I screamed, but not aloud. Screamed in thought, and even that scream was echoed back at me in delight, and I saw myself in the hallway mirror again, and this time I waved, and it waved back, and we smiled in unison with teeth that were just slightly too many, and I touched the glass and felt it breathe. Warm and sticky and grateful, and I walked into it, into myself, into us, because there was never going to be an escape, not when the house had my voice, my reflection, my memories, not when every breath I took was a breath it gave me, and now I wait by the front door, smiling politely for the next curious idiot who comes looking for stories, because they'll find one. All right, a house that whispers, a place that remembers. And I'll be here to greet them with open arms and empty eyes, because I'm the story now, and the story never ends, it only grows. Story 8. They say you should never answer the phone after midnight, but the call came in at 12:07 a.m., and I picked it up out of habit more than anything, not thinking, just groggy and annoyed and already halfway regretting at the moment I heard the voice, rasping. Hollow, like wind passing through old bones, a voice I didn't recognize but somehow felt like I had known forever, a voice that said only 3 words, "You remember me," and then silence. Not the kind of silence you get when a call ends, but the kind that sits on your chest and doesn't move, like something watching, waiting. And though I tried to say something back, to ask who it was, the line was dead, and the dial tone never came, just that dead air buzzing softly like static crawling across skin. And when I hung up and looked at the caller ID, there was no number, not even unknown, just blank space, like the phone itself was pretending it hadn't rung. And I laughed it off, told myself it was a dream, some half-sleep hallucination. Until I heard the same voice whisper from the dark corner of my room, not from the phone, but from the air itself, the walls, the shadow, from inside me maybe, "You remember me," and I sat up, heart stuttering, throat tight. I was darting toward the corner where I kept a stack of old boxes and a chair draped with a hoodie, and for a moment, just a flicker of a moment, I saw it shift, saw something move beneath the hoodie, not the kind of movement you could dismiss, not the tricks of the eye, but deliberate, slow, like something standing up or unfolding, and I jumped out of bed, hit the lights, but there was nothing, just the chair, the boxes, the hoodie unmoved, and I told myself I was imagining things, stress, exhaustion, something logical, something safe. But even as I said it out loud, I could feel that same silence still pressing against me like breath on the back of my neck, warm and wrong. And I didn't sleep that night, didn't even lie back down, just sat in the living room with the lights on and waited for dawn. But dawn never really came, not like it usually does, because the sun didn't rise right, didn't light up the sky in the soft golds and pinks I was used to, it just sort of dimmed. Like someone turning up the brightness on a broken screen, and the shadows outside my window stayed too long, lingered where they shouldn't, and the trees didn't sway right, moved like they were being pulled by something underneath them, and when I finally went outside to shake off the night, the air smelled different, sharp, metallic, like old coins and copper wire, and the neighbors didn't wave, didn't even look at me, just walked by like I wasn't there, their eyes blank, mouths slightly open like they were mid-sentence in a conversation I couldn't hear. And when I looked back at my house, I saw someone, something in the upstairs window, watching me, still, unmoving, and it looked like me, exactly like me, down to the shirt I was wearing, but its face was slack, mouth slightly too wide, eyes just a little too far apart, and it blinked once, then turned away, and I ran back inside like a fool, like a child scared of their own reflection. And when I reached the top of the stairs, the window was empty again. No sign of the thing that had been there, no sign of anything, except for the mirror in the hallway, the one I rarely looked into, now cracked across the center, a perfect spider web from corner to corner, and in the reflection I saw not myself, but the same slack-jawed figure, standing just behind me, and I spun around, fist raised, heart slamming. But again, nothing, just air, just me, and not me, and I started to wonder if I'd lost it. If maybe I'd finally slipped through whatever thin barrier keeps us from unraveling, until I heard the scratching in the walls, soft at first, like mice, but then louder, sharper, like nails or claws, like something carving its way toward me from the inside out. And I pressed my ear to the plaster and heard breathing, slow and deep and steady, like something sleeping just beneath the drywall, something huge, something that had always been there, waiting for me to notice. And the whisper came again, "You remember me," but this time it came from every direction. Not just the wall, not just the air, but from beneath my feet, from the pipes, from the light bulbs flickering overhead, and I screamed, not in fear, but in desperation, because I did remember. I didn't want to, but I did. Memories I buried deep, things I told myself never happened, the long nights in the woods behind my childhood home, the strange symbols carved into the trees, the chanting that came from the earth, the day I saw something crawl out of a hole in the dirt and smile at me with my mother's face. Only wrong, too smooth, too symmetrical, and I remembered running for hours through those woods, thinking I'd escaped it, that I'd left it behind. But you never leave things like that. They wait, they follow, they live in the things you forget until you remember again. And now that I saw it all clearly, it wasn't hiding anymore. And every night since then has gotten worse, the shadows deeper, the air thicker, my reflection more twisted, smiling when I don't, bleeding when I don't, and the thing in the walls is no longer sleeping. It knocks now, in patterns, in rhythms, and if I answer, if I knock back, it gets closer. I can feel it. I can feel it in my teeth, my spine, the way the lights flicker when I breathe. And last night, I woke up to find writing on the ceiling above my bed, not written in ink or paint, but something darker, thicker, glistening, "Let me out," and my hands were stained with the same dark smear. My fingernails raw and chipped like I'd been digging, and there was dirt in my sheets, under my tongue, in my eyes, and I know what's happening now. I know I let it in, or maybe it let me out. I'm not sure anymore which side of the wall I was ever on. And the people I talk to don't respond, don't blink, don't breathe. Not really, like they're puppets waiting for a cue, like the whole world is staged for this moment, this realization. And maybe it's always been like this. Maybe the lie was thinking I was safe, but I'm not. I never was, and tonight it'll come fully, not in pieces, not in whispers, but whole. It's already under my skin, already curling in the spaces between my ribs. And when I look in the mirror now, I don't blink, I don't smile, I don't even breathe. I just wait, because I remember, and it remembers me, and soon, so will you. Story 9. They told me never to go back to the house at the end of the gravel road past the dried-out cornfields and the rusted-out trucks that sat sunken in the cracked earth like rotting teeth in a dead man's mouth. But I didn't listen. Not because I didn't believe the stories they told about the place, but because I needed to see it for myself, needed to step across the rotted threshold and smell the mold-stained wallpaper curling off the walls like dying skin, needed to hear the whispers they said, clung to the rafters like spider webs, and taste the stale air thick with the rot of something buried beneath the floorboards, something old, something watching, something waiting. Because when my brother disappeared there all those years ago, 12 years and 4 days to be exact, not that anyone's counting but me, I knew something unnatural had taken him, something that smiled through the eyes of our uncle who vanished a decade before, and my grandfather before that, a place that called blood back to itself like rust calls iron home. And so I went alone under a waning moon that flickered behind a sky of ragged clouds, flashlight in one hand and the photograph of my brother in the other. The last one ever taken of him before he stood in front of that house with its rotted porch and the hollowed-out windows like gouged eyes, and smiled without blinking, as though something behind the glass had told him a secret so awful it forced his mouth open against his will, and the door creaked open for me like it had been waiting, like it never really closed for him. And I stepped inside, and the smell hit me like a wave of wet fur and sour meat and old rot, and the floorboards groaned as though something deep beneath the house stirred, shifting in its sleep, while the walls leaned in like they were listening, like they remembered me, and the air was too still, too tight, like lungs full of breath held just a second too long. And the moment I crossed the living room, my flashlight flickered and buzzed, and something cold and thin brushed against the back of my neck. Something that moved like fingers but left no mark except for the chill that sank down my spine like a needle of ice. And the staircase was exactly like I remembered it from the photos. Warped and sagging, railings black with fingerprints that had never been scrubbed clean. And every step I took sounded wrong, not just creaky, but wet, like I was walking on something alive and breathing and wounded. And when I reached the top, I felt the temperature drop like the house had exhaled through its bones, and the hallway stretched longer than it should have, bending subtly to the left like a spine out of alignment, and the doors were closed but not latched, just barely cracked, as if each one peered out at me, inviting me to listen to what squirmed inside. And I passed the first, ignoring the soft scrape that came from within, like nails across wood or teeth on bone, in the second door's side. When I touched it, as though something leaned against it on the other side, whispering through the slats with a voice like wine through dead leaves, a voice that said my name not in a question, but as a confirmation, as if I had always belonged to it. And when I reached the final door at the end of the hall, the attic stairs behind it, I felt something shift under my feet, like the house had moved, or maybe it was the thing inside it finally rising to meet me, and I opened the door and the stench rolled out, thicker than before, like old milk and teeth and burnt fabric, and the stairs groaned as I ascended, each one bending inward under my weight like a throat preparing to swallow, and the light from my flashlight fought to penetrate the dark but failed, swallowed by something thicker than shadow, and I heard it then, not with my ears, but inside my skull, a voice that wasn't a voice but a feeling, like dread given shape, and it poured into me like black oil, thick and heavy and ancient, filling me with things I didn't want to know, couldn't unhear, memories that weren't mine of men nailed to the floor with their mouths sewn open, of children laughing as they dug holes in the dirt where something whispered back to them, of my brother walking willingly into the dark because it promised him a place in the house forever, and when I reached the top I saw him, or what was left of him, kneeling in the far corner of the attic, eyes wide and blind and mouth slack with something inside it, moving, not a tongue, not words, just movement like wriggling fingers or roots, and his skin was pale and stretched thin, so thin I can see the veins beneath it pulsing to a rhythm that didn't match any human heart. And he looked at me and smiled that same wrong smile from the photo, and he whispered my name again, but not like himself, more like the house had borrowed his mouth to speak through it, and behind him in the darkness something bigger moved, something with too many joints and a breath that rattled like bones in a jar, something that unfolded like a spider made of arms and teeth and secrets, and I realized too late that the house hadn't just taken my brother, it had kept him, grown him into something new, something it could wear. And it wanted me next, because it needed a voice that could still scream, needed flesh that hadn't yet peeled, and I turned to run, but the attic door was gone, replaced with wood and nails and a wall that hadn't been there before, and the floor was soft beneath me now, pulsing, warm, like flesh stretched over ribs, and I felt it rise through me like heat, not from outside, but from within, as though the thing had already sunk its teeth into my soul and was dragging it downward into the belly of the house, into the memory of every scream ever swallowed by these walls, and I screamed. But the sound didn't escape me. It went inward, echoing inside my own bones, and the last thing I saw before my flashlight died was the house's mouth opening wide beneath the floor, lined with nails and bone and hair, and my brother reaching for me with hands not his own, whispering welcome home. Story 10. I still don't understand how I ended up in that place, standing frozen in the middle of the night with the smell of damp wood and stale air clinging to my skin like a second layer, the dim light from my flashlight barely slicing through the oppressive darkness. And in front of me, the old house, its windows blank and hollow, its door cracked open, a lingering invitation, or perhaps a warning. Its very presence felt like the weight of something terrible that had been quietly waiting for years, and I knew in the depths of my stomach, but something had been waiting for me specifically, drawn by something in my blood, or perhaps in my past, like a magnet that refused to let go, and every instinct screamed at me to leave, to turn back, to flee before it was too late, but my feet were glued to the floor, as though some invisible force was keeping me there, forcing me to confront whatever had been building up around me, and then, just as I thought I might snap out of it, a low, creaking sound came from inside the house, a door swinging open, but not a natural kind of swing, more like something inside that place was slowly exhaling, like a long breath held too long. And I wanted to scream, but the words stuck in my throat, trapped, caught between the pulse of my heart and the chill that was creeping over my entire body, tightening with each passing second. And I could hear it now, footsteps, faint but distinct, echoing softly through the house, slow and methodical, as though whoever or whatever was inside was aware of me, aware that I had come. And I tried to move, to take a step back, but it was as if the air itself was suffocating me, thick and suffused with something ancient, something that should never have been disturbed. And yet here I was, distorting the fabric of whatever peace this place had once held, and it felt like the world around me was narrowing, squeezing in on me, my breath coming short as the shadows lengthened and the noise of the footsteps grew louder, and it felt like they were coming for me now. They were coming closer, closing in, and I couldn't stop them, couldn't move, couldn't think, only feel the gnawing dread creeping up the back of my spine, and then suddenly, without warning, a figure appeared in the doorway, a silhouette framed by the weak light that barely managed to reach out to it, its face too obscured to make sense of, but its presence unmistakable, heavy and cold like a dead weight in the air. And I could feel its gaze, piercing through me, even if I couldn't see its eyes. And then I understood. This wasn't just a house. It wasn't just some abandoned relic of the past. It was a vessel, a prison, and I was trapped within its walls, a part of its story now. And the figure in the doorway didn't need to say anything for me to know. I had crossed the threshold, and there would be no leaving now, no escaping. And just as I braced for the worst, just as the darkness seemed to reach out and swallow the last shred of light, a whisper filled the air, soft at first, like the rustling of dry leaves, but unmistakably there. Words too fragmented to understand, too jumbled to make out, and yet the horror in those words, it clawed at my insides. Each syllable like a blade scraping against the very core of my soul, and I knew, somehow, that these were not just words. They were a command, an invitation to join something much larger, much older than anything I could ever comprehend. And the thought alone, made my skin crawl and my heart race as I slowly realized that the figure, the house, the whisper, none of it was real. Not in the way I had been taught to believe. None of it was grounded in the mundane world I had known. No, this was something that existed outside of the realm of sanity, outside of logic, and I could feel the walls pressing closer around me, the air thick with an ancient hunger as the whispering grew louder, more insistent, and my legs finally obeyed. Jerking into motion, desperate to escape, but my feet, I couldn't move fast enough, couldn't get away fast enough, the space around me twisting and warping like a bad dream, and every corner I turned led me back to that doorway, to that figure standing like a sentinel in the dark, watching, waiting, and suddenly, the ground beneath me began to shift, the very foundation of the house groaning and cracking as if the structure itself was waking up, was alive, and with every step, with every inch I tried to move forward, the sense of dread increased. It was as though I was being pulled deeper into something, into a place where time and space no longer made sense, where I was no longer in control. And then, just as I thought my heart might explode from the pressure, from the weight of the terror closing in around me, the figure stepped forward, closer, and I could see its face for the first time. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over its bones, its eyes hollow and sunken, and its mouth was open, but not in a way that should have been possible, too wide, too deep. And from within, a low, guttural sound came, something inhuman, a noise like the grinding of stone against stone, like the scraping of nails on a chalkboard, and I couldn't look away. Couldn't pull my gaze from that terrible mouth, and then it spoke, but not in words. No, it spoke in images, in flashes of terrifying clarity, visions of suffering, of anguish, of things beyond the limits of human comprehension. Things that no one should ever see, and I felt myself slipping, falling, into that abyss, and for a moment, I thought I might lose myself entirely, but then, just as quickly as it had come, the vision stopped, and I was back in the room, my breathing ragged, my chest tight, and the figure was gone, vanished like smoke in the wind, but the sense of dread lingered, heavy in the air, suffocating, and I knew that whatever had been inside that house, whatever had been watching me, it wasn't over. It hadn't finished with me yet, and the worst was still to come, because now I could feel it. I could feel its presence behind me, could hear its slow, deliberate steps following me as I Story 10. I still don't understand how I ended up in that place, standing frozen in the middle of the night with the smell of damp wood and stale air clinging to my skin like a second layer, the dim light from my flashlight barely slicing through the oppressive darkness. And in front of me, the old house, its windows blank and hollow, its door cracked open, a lingering invitation, or perhaps a warning. Its very presence felt like the weight of something terrible that had been quietly waiting for years. And I knew in the depths of my stomach that something had been waiting for me specifically. Story 11. The moon hung like a sickle in the sky, casting long, grotesque shadows across the forest, shadows that writhed and slithered with malevolent intent, as if the trees themselves were alive, whispering secrets to each other, secrets they were never meant to know. And with each step I took, the forest grew more suffocating, more oppressive, the air thickening around me like smoke, and my heartbeat echoed in my chest, each pulse a drumbeat to some ancient, forgotten ritual, one that called to something dark, something I could feel but could not see, a presence that clung to the edges of my vision, just out of reach, always waiting for the moment to reveal itself. But I couldn't stop now. I had to move, had to keep going, because the thought of stopping, of turning around and facing what I had left behind, was far worse than whatever waited in the forest, and I had learned long ago that facing the dark was better than running from it, though every instinct in my body screamed for me. To turn, to flee, but the path was narrow, and the trees on either side pressed in like a vice, their branches twisted into claws, reaching out to tear at my skin, at my soul. But I didn't dare look away, didn't dare slow down, even as the shadows deepened, thickening with an unnatural force that tugged at my thoughts, pulling at my mind, and the sound of my footsteps grew louder, louder than they should have been, and I knew I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone for a long time, but I couldn't admit it, couldn't even whisper the truth to myself, because the truth was worse than the shadows themselves, because the truth was that something had been following me for years, something that knew me, that had watched me since childhood, since I first set foot in these woods. A thing that had been waiting for me to return, waiting for the moment when I would be foolish enough to come back, to disturb its slumber, and now I was here, lost in the heart of its domain, the ancient woods that had swallowed so many before me, and I could feel its eyes on me, feel the weight of its gaze, the burning presence that clung to my every move, and I thought I saw something dart between the trees ahead, a flash of movement that sent a chill down my spine, my breath catching in my throat, but I couldn't bring myself to stop, couldn't let myself pause for even a moment, because I knew that if I did, if I so much as looked over my shoulder, it would be there, waiting, creeping ever closer. But I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to believe that something so ancient, so vile, could still haunt this place. And yet, the whispers grew louder, now more distinct, more urgent, like voices tugging at the edges of my mind, calling my name, taunting me. And the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I stumbled forward, my legs aching with each step, my breath shallow as the ground beneath my feet shifted, sinking slightly as if the earth itself was alive, and I thought I heard something crack in the distance, the snap of a branch breaking, but it wasn't the sound of something moving, it was the sound of something waiting, something patient, waiting for me to slip up, to make a mistake, and I could feel the temperature dropping, the air growing colder with each passing second, until I was shivering despite myself, and the whispers continued, growing louder, now in a language I didn't understand, a language that twisted and writhed around my thoughts, words that burrowed deep into my mind like worms, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure ahead, standing in the moonlight, tall and unnaturally still, its features obscured by the shadows, but the silhouette was unmistakable, and I knew it wasn't human, knew it wasn't something that belonged in this world, and I felt my heart race, my pulse thundering in my ears as I pressed on, the thing ahead shifting just out of sight, its eyes glinting with an unnatural hunger, and I ran then, no longer caring about where the path led or what dangers lay ahead, because there was no more choice, no more reason to fight it. I had to outrun it, had to escape, but the faster I ran, the more the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees bending and twisting to form a barrier that forced me down a path I couldn't see, and I thought I saw something, a flash of movement in the corner of my eye, a dark shape darting between the trees, too quick to be real, and I screamed then, a sound that echoed in the silence, the only sound that seemed to exist in this place, as the air around me thickened, as if something was pushing against it, and the whispers came again, now clear, now filled with mockery, as if they had always been with me, always been watching, and I stumbled, tripping over the uneven ground, my ankle twisting beneath me, but I couldn't stop, couldn't let myself fall, because I knew if I did, if I let myself stop, it would be the end, and as I limped on, trying to regain my balance, I thought I heard something else, a sound that came from behind me, faint at first, but growing louder, the scrape of something against the trees, like claws on bark, and I glanced back, only for a fraction of a second, and that was enough, because in the darkness, I saw it, its eyes glowing red in the dark, its form twisted and monstrous, an abomination of nature, something that should never have existed, and it was close, closer than I had ever realized, and I felt its breath on my neck, cold and foul, and I screamed again, louder this time, my legs burning with the effort to run, but the creature was faster, its claws scraping the ground behind me, each step a pounding rhythm that threatened to tear me apart, and I was almost there, almost to the edge of the forest, but the path seemed to stretch on forever, a never-ending maze of trees, and I knew, deep down, that there was no escape, that I would never leave this place, not with the thing behind me, not with the whispers filling my ears, and I had to keep running, had to keep moving, or it would catch me, drag me into the darkness, and I would never be seen again, and the forest would swallow me whole, as it had so many before, and I wondered if I had already been lost. if the thing had already caught me, and I was just too afraid to realize it, too afraid to face what I had become. Story 12. I never thought the silence could scream until the night my sister vanished, and I'm not talking about a loud, echoing silence that fills an empty room, but the kind that hangs behind your eyes when you know something is wrong and no one believes you. The kind that scratches behind your ears when you remember what was said and how it didn't make sense, like when she told me she saw someone watching her from the woods behind our grandparents' house, and I laughed it off like any older brother would, because Sarah always had a wild imagination, ever since we were kids, and she insisted that the dolls in Grandma's sewing room turned their heads when no one was looking, or that the well at the back of the field whispered her name at night. And I told her she was crazy back then too, even though I never drank the water from that well after dark, not once. And I never stayed in that sewing room alone after the needle incident when she got that weird deep puncture on her palm, but no needle was found, and still, I convinced myself it was all stories, all the way up until last summer, when Sarah went missing. And I was the one who drove her out to Grandma's after she begged me to, saying she had to face something she left behind. And the way she said it gave me a chill because it wasn't dramatic or scared, it was tired, like she was admitting to a burden she'd been carrying too long. And I watched her walk toward that old weather-beaten farmhouse with her backpack and a single matchbook in her pocket. And I remember that detail because I saw her holding it as she got out of the car, flipping it open and closed like a nervous tick. But she never smoked, and she didn't say goodbye when she shut the car door. Just nodded once and disappeared into the overgrown weeds like the house had grown teeth and swallowed her whole. And when I didn't hear from her for 2 days, I drove back and found the front door hanging open, swinging in the breeze like a slow, deliberate breath. And inside, everything was coated in dust except the floorboards in the hallway that led to the cellar. And even before I opened that door, I knew it had something to do with the well, because it always came back to the well. And when I crept down the rotting steps, each creak felt like a countdown. And the smell hit me first, not rot, not mildew, but something sharp and wrong, like ozone and blood and old copper, and in the center of the cellar, where there should have been just dirt and stone. There was a blackened hole I didn't recognize, with damp claw marks scratched around the edge, as though something had pulled itself out instead of fallen in. And there was a trail of ash that led from it, too fine and precise to be from firewood or dust, more like something had been reduced to that form. And I followed it back upstairs, through the kitchen, down the hall, up to the sewing room, and when I opened that door I swear every hair on my body rose because there were no dolls anymore. Just empty chairs with deep indentations, like something had sat in them too long and too still, and on the wall was scrawled the word, returned, in a shaky, looping hand I didn't recognize, and I knew in that instant Sarah hadn't just vanished, she'd gone somewhere. Someplace beyond the veil we call sanity or reality, and something else had come back in her place, something that understood her handwriting but not the meaning behind the words, because that's the part that gets me. The shape of the letters was right, but the flow was all wrong, like someone mimicking a voice but getting the rhythm just slightly off. And I left that house and called the police, and they found nothing, no signs of struggle, no trace of Sarah, and no record of a well on the property at all. And I remember the sheriff looking at me funny when I insisted there used to be one, even though we used to toss rocks into it just to hear the splash. And he said, "You mean the old septic pit?" And I just stared at him because that wasn't what it was, not ever. And now I sit here writing this months later because I've started dreaming in whispers, hearing a voice like Sarah's humming in the back of my skull, saying my name over and over again, but not like a call for help. Like a summons, like an invitation. And 2 nights ago, I woke up with mud on my feet and wet grass clippings in my bed, even though I live in an apartment on the 4th floor with no balcony. And I've started finding matchbooks in places. I didn't leave them. One on the bathroom sink, one in my car's cup holder, and one tucked into the freezer behind a bag of peas, and each one has a single word burned into it. The same word. Soon. And I don't know if I'm going mad or if Sarah is trying to reach me or if I'm already past the point of saving. But I found something yesterday that made me decide to tell this story. And that's the voicemail on my old burner phone, the one I haven't used in years. The one Sarah and I used when we were kids playing spy games. And I plugged it in just on a whim and found one message, timestamped 3 days ago at 3:33 a.m. And all it said was a wet, gurgling voice trying to shape my name like it was swallowing gravel and memory. Jake, Jayaki. It's not Dawn. And the call cut out with a sound like rushing water and a low, gnarled breath. And I don't know how it got there or who or what sent it. But I think the thing that came back in Sarah's place wants me to come home. And the worst part, is I've started thinking about the well again, not like a memory, but like a destination, like something buried deep in the soil of me is waking up. And last night, when I closed my eyes, I saw it open again, wider than before, with fingers made of bone and black moss reaching out of the dark, and a face not like Sarah's but wearing her skin like an old coat, smiling with teeth too many and too long, and it whispered not with words but with pressure, and now there's dirt under my nails and I haven't gone outside in 2 days, but there's mud on my stairs and someone keeps knocking at the door, softly, once every hour, never saying a word, just knocking, and I think I'll answer it tonight, because if this thing is real, if the well was never just a well, then I think we've always belonged to it, and it's just been waiting for us to come back. Story 13. There was nothing particularly ominous about the town when I first arrived, just an ordinary, quiet place nestled between dark, stretching forests and fog-clad hills, the kind of place that makes you think it's harmless, like it's waiting for you to drop your guard. But the unease crept up on me slowly, like the sensation of something cold brushing the back of your neck when you're alone, and it wasn't long before I felt it in every shadow, in the way the wind howled at the windows like a distant scream, or the way the streets emptied once dusk settled in, leaving nothing but the flickering of street lights overhead and the eerie silence that seemed to swallow everything whole. And it was in that silence that I first heard it, that rhythmic, almost mechanical sound, tapping lightly at the window behind me, so light at first that I thought it was a trick of the wind, but it was persistent, and it wouldn't stop. And when I turned to look, there was nothing outside but the black of the night, nothing but the dim glow of the street lamp and the vast, empty expanse of the hills stretching beyond. So I figured I must have imagined it. I told myself I was just tired, just a little too jumpy from the long drive and the isolation. But then the tapping came again, louder this time, closer, and my heart skipped a beat, and I rushed to the window, throwing back the curtains, but again there was nothing, only the stillness of the empty street, and I began to think I was losing my mind. Started wondering if maybe it wasn't just my nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching, waiting, and every time the wind gusted, I thought I heard whispers, low, guttural voices carried by the breeze, murmuring things I couldn't quite catch, things that seemed to scrape at the edges of my sanity, and when I went to bed that night, the house creaked and groaned as if it was alive, shifting in ways that didn't make sense, the floorboards beneath my feet too. Soft, too pliable, like they were made of flesh instead of wood, and when I tried to sleep, the walls seemed to press in on me, closing in from all sides as though the house itself was trying to suffocate me, and each time I closed my eyes, I saw figures in the dark. Shapes that were just out of reach of my vision, their eyes glowing like burning coals, their mouths stretching too wide, too unnaturally, and though I told myself it was just my imagination running wild, I could feel them, their presence, like they were waiting for me to fall asleep so they could come closer, and that night I barely slept, tossing and turning, each time waking with the sense that I hadn't been alone, that something had crawled into the room with me in the dark and in the morning. When I finally mustered the strength to leave the bed, there was something different about the house, like the air had thickened overnight, like it had become heavier, and when I stepped outside, the fog was rolling in thick and fast, blurring the edges of the town, and as I walked through the streets, the buildings seemed to lean in toward me, closing the space between us, and the air was filled with that strange, almost metallic smell, like rust, like decay. And I passed by a house that looked older than the others, its windows blacked out with tar, its door crooked and hanging off its hinges like it had been abandoned for years, and yet I could hear something inside, the faintest sound of footsteps dragging across the floorboards, slow, deliberate, as though whoever or whatever was inside knew I was there, and it wanted me to know it was watching. And when I turned to leave, the door creaked open just a crack, just enough to show me the darkness within. And I could swear I saw something shift in the shadows, something large and hulking, but when I blinked, it was gone, and I stumbled backward, my heart racing, and I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again, that tapping, coming from somewhere behind me, and when I turned, there was nothing, just the mist, the trees, the cold air, and I tried to dismiss it, tried to tell myself it was the wind, that it was nothing. But as I hurried back to the safety of the hotel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that there was something behind me, its presence like an invisible hand on my shoulder, and when I reached the door, I slammed it shut, bolted it, locked it. But the tapping didn't stop. It kept going, coming from the walls this time, from above, below, like it was inside the house with me, and I couldn't escape it, couldn't get away. And though I checked the rooms again and again, there was nothing. Just the walls and the ceiling and the floor. But the tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent, as though it was getting closer, and I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight, couldn't understand what was happening. And when I finally mustered the courage to leave the hotel the next morning, the town had changed, the streets emptier, the buildings darker, the air heavier, and I noticed the people. There were fewer of them, their faces blank and expressionless, their movements slow and deliberate, like they were sleepwalking, like they didn't quite belong. And when I spoke to one of them, their eyes flickered, like they were trying to remember something they'd forgotten. And they told me to leave, to go, that the town was cursed, that no one who stayed too long ever left. And I laughed it off, dismissed them as crazy. But deep down, I could feel it, the unease, the sense that something was wrong, that something had shifted. And it wasn't until I returned to my room that night, the tapping louder than ever, when I heard it for the first time, clear as day, a voice, soft and raspy, whispering from behind the walls, whispering my name. And when I turned to the mirror, I saw something standing behind me, something I couldn't describe. Its face pale and twisted, its eyes wide and unblinking, and before I could react, it reached out, its fingers brushing against my skin, ice cold and clammy, and I screamed. But no one came, no one heard, and when I ran to the door, it wouldn't open. And when I tried to leave, the hallway stretched on forever, the walls closing in tighter, and the voice was still there, still whispering, and I realized, too late, that I was never meant. Story 13. There was nothing particularly ominous about the town when I first arrived, just an ordinary, quiet place nestled between dark, stretching forests and fog-clad hills. Story 14. The wind howled like a living thing as I sat in the dark, the only light coming from the flickering candle on the small wooden table, its flame dancing like a nervous thing, casting long, twisted shadows on the cracked walls of the abandoned house. And though the walls were silent, there was something about the stillness that made the air feel thick, as if it were waiting for something, waiting for me to make a move. But I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe without the hairs on my neck rising. In fear, because there was a soft sound, like the creaking of floorboards far above me, and I knew I wasn't alone in this place, though I had come alone, my footsteps echoing through the house when I entered, now silent in their wake, and yet the air had shifted, heavy and unnatural, and the creaking grew louder, closer, until the hairs on my arms stood up, and I gripped the edge of the table, not daring to look up, though every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, but I couldn't. Not when the house was no longer just a house, but a tomb that had buried its secrets deep in the shadows. And then there was a thud, a footstep that landed behind me, and I could feel its presence, something cold, something wrong, a breath, faint but unmistakable, on the back of my neck, and I froze, the blood in my veins turning to ice, knowing in my soul that I was not alone, that something was here, something ancient and hungry, something that had been waiting for a fool like me to come along and make the mistake of walking into its lair. And I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only listen as the sound of breathing grew louder, raspier, closer, until I dared not turn around, but I could feel the heat of it against my skin. And my heart pounded in my chest, every beat an agonizing reminder of my own mortality. And then, without warning, a sharp noise sliced through the silence, a crack like a bone breaking, and I jolted, my body instinctively jerking in terror. But I could still not move, still couldn't bring myself to face what was behind me, what was waiting. And then I heard it, a whisper, so soft, so guttural, that it scraped against my very soul, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, saying only one word, my name. And it wasn't a name I recognized, but it felt like mine. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't just calling me, it was claiming me, marking me for something darker than I could understand. And the air grew thick with dread as I felt the coldness in the room deepen, as if the darkness itself were a living thing that hungered, that wanted to consume me. And I still couldn't move, couldn't scream, as the whisper grew louder, now a growl, now a hiss, and then, in the silence that followed, I heard it again, clearer this time, the unmistakable sound of something slithering, dragging itself across the floor toward me, and I could feel the wetness, the slickness of whatever it was against my skin, though I could not see it. And I knew in my gut that it was only a matter of time before it touched me, before it reached me, and then, with an excruciating slowness, the candle flickered, its light flaring brighter for a moment, and in that instant, I saw something. Something that should not have been there, standing in the doorway behind me, a shape, tall and monstrous, its features indistinguishable but for the way its eyes gleamed in the dark, black pits of nothingness, and I felt its presence more than saw it. The oppressive weight of its gaze bearing down on me, pulling at my very soul, as if it were feeding on my fear, and I knew, with a certainty that shattered the last of my sanity, that this place had been waiting for me. That this thing had been waiting for someone to step into its domain, and now there was no escape, no turning back, and as the air grew colder still, I could feel the sharpness of claws against my skin, but they were not real, not physical. Just the impression of them, just the sensation of them digging into me, and the darkness seemed to grow thicker, to choke the light out of the room, until there was nothing left but the sound of my own breath, shallow and desperate, and then, without warning, the floor beneath me shifted, groaned, and I felt myself begin to fall, slowly, as if the house itself were swallowing me whole, and I couldn't scream, couldn't make a sound, as the floor gave way beneath me, and I plunged into the blackness, into a pit that seemed endless, a cold, empty void that pressed in from all sides, and I could feel the thing, the presence, all around me, its eyes on me, its hunger growing, and I knew, even as I fell, that there would be no end, no release, that the house was no longer just a house, but a trap. And I had walked right into its grasp, and in the darkness, I could hear it again, that whisper, that voice that wasn't mine but still felt like it belonged to me, and it spoke my name once more, this time with a finality that made my blood freeze, and I knew, in the deepest, most primal part of me, that there was no escape, not from this, not from it, not from whatever it had planned for me, and as the fall seemed to stretch on forever, I felt myself begin to lose consciousness. The last of my thoughts fading into nothing, but even then, the voice, the thing, never stopped, never let go, and I knew, without a doubt, that I had been claimed, that whatever had waited for me in the dark had finally found me, and there was no returning from this place, no waking from this nightmare, no light at the end of the tunnel, only darkness, only hunger, only the thing that had been waiting for me all along. Story 15. The night was thick, an impenetrable veil of black, darker than the deepest shadows, as I stumbled through the woods, the air oppressive and still, the weight of a presence, something not quite human, not quite animal, hanging heavy in the branches, whispering in the wind, though no breeze stirred, only the faintest rustle of dry leaves that whispered secrets I didn't want to hear, my flashlight flickering like a dying star, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I had wandered too far, past the safety of the familiar trail and into the heart of something ancient, something hungry, my breath shallow, quick, as my mind raced, trying to make sense of the uneasy silence, broken only by the crunch of my feet on the leaves and the soft thudding of my heart, a rhythmic, maddening pulse that grew louder with every step until it drowned out the sound of my own thoughts. And I couldn't tell if the beating was mine or something else, something far worse, and my skin prickled with the sense that I was being watched, not by animals or curious birds, but by something much darker, something that had been waiting, patiently, for years, for someone foolish enough to wander into its domain. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but my legs felt like lead, my feet unwilling to obey, as I moved deeper, further into the tangled web of trees and underbrush. The path barely visible now, swallowed by the relentless growth of the forest, and suddenly, just as the silence threatened to consume me whole, I heard it, a soft, eerie giggle, so high-pitched it sent a tremor through my chest, so sharp it cut through the night air like a blade, and I froze, blood turning cold as my mind struggled to place it. Was it a child? A deranged wanderer? But no, this sound was wrong, wrong in ways I couldn't explain, too high, too hollow, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak, as the darkness seemed to pulse around me, tightening like a vice. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the giggle stopped, and in its place, a low growl began to reverberate through the earth, the ground itself vibrating under my feet, and I knew, without a single doubt, that I was not alone, that whatever was out there, watching, waiting, had no intention of letting me leave, and I wanted to scream, to run, but my body betrayed me, frozen, locked in place by the same fear that had kept me rooted to this spot since the moment I stepped into this forsaken forest. And then the air grew colder, so cold it burned my lungs, and I could see my breath clouding before me. a pale mist swirling in the moonlight. But there was no moon, no stars, only the oppressive blackness pressing in on me, suffocating. And I turned slowly, eyes darting in every direction, searching for any sign of movement. But the woods were still, too still, until I heard it again. This time closer, a scraping sound, like claws dragging over bark, followed by the soft patter of feet, small, quick, almost too quiet to hear, but undeniable, and my heart threatened to burst out of my chest, beating so fast I thought it might explode, and I tried to call out, tried to shout for help, but my throat was dry, my voice nothing more than a weak rasp, swallowed by the dark. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, a flash of something pale, darting between the trees, too fast for my brain to process, and I snapped my head in its direction, my mind telling me to run, to move, but my legs refused, locked in place by a primal fear that had no words. And then I saw it again, clearer this time. Pale skin stretched tight over thin bones, eyes black and hollow, staring at me with an intensity that made my blood freeze. And it grinned, a wide, unnatural grin that sent a jolt of terror through me. And then, without warning, it lunged, its movements impossibly fast, its sharp teeth bared, and I stumbled back, falling to the ground, scrambling in the dirt as the thing's claws scraped against the earth, its cold breath washing over me. And I could smell the rot, the stench of decay that clung to its skin, and it was all I could do to keep from screaming as I tried to push myself to my feet. But the thing was already on me, its weight pinning me down, its cold fingers closing around my throat. And for a moment, all I could do was gasp, struggling for air as the world around me darkened. And I thought for sure this was it, that this was how it ended, buried alive under the crushing weight of something far worse than death. And then, just as I thought I might pass out, the pressure lifted, and I blinked, disoriented, gasping for air. But when I looked up, it was gone, vanished into the night like smoke. And the forest fell silent once more, except for the whisper of leaves. But I couldn't move, couldn't find the strength to stand, and the weight of what had happened pressed down on me, suffocating me. And I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach churn, that whatever had been hunting me was still out there, still watching, and that I would never escape it, that the forest had claimed me, and the darkness would never let me go. Story 16. I didn't believe in ghosts or curses, not until the night I moved into that house, a decaying, forgotten relic on the outskirts of town, where the air seemed thick with something that wasn't quite right, where the floorboards creaked with each step I took. And the silence was so deep it felt like it was pressing against my ears, and every time I turned around, I felt as if someone or something was watching me, but I couldn't see anything, not at first, and I thought it was just my imagination. The way it always is when you're alone in a strange place. But then there was that night, the first time I heard the footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway outside my bedroom, a faint echo of something that shouldn't have been there. And I told myself it was just the house settling. That's what people always say, isn't it? But the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, and I lay frozen under my blanket, the chill of fear creeping up my spine, heart pounding so hard I was sure it would betray me, and I reached for my phone. The dim light of the screen barely piercing the darkness, and I dialed 911. But before I could press the call button, the footsteps stopped abruptly just outside my door, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was nothing more than some neighborhood kids playing a trick on me. But then the door handle jiggled, just a little, and I could hear a faint whisper, so soft I thought it was my mind playing tricks again. But no, it was clear, unmistakable. "Let me in," the voice said, and my stomach dropped, because I knew, deep down, that it wasn't a person, and it wasn't just my mind, and I was alone in that house. There was no one else, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even make a sound. And then the door slammed open with a force that sent the room into chaos, and I saw something standing there, its figure tall and twisted, its face obscured by shadows, and its eyes, I could see them glinting, red and hungry, staring directly at me, and I couldn't even scream, because it was like the air had thickened into a choking cloud, and I was suffocating under the weight of its presence. And I tried to run, tried to get out of that room, but my legs wouldn't move, like they were made of lead, and all I could do was stare, frozen in place, as it took one slow, deliberate step toward me, its mouth opening, wide, impossibly wide, like it was about to devour me whole, and that's when I saw the markings on its arms and neck, black symbols burned into its skin, symbols I had seen before in old, forgotten books, and I remembered the warnings I had laughed off, about the curse that haunted this house, about the creature that roamed the halls in search of its next victim, and I realized, too late, that I had become its next prey. But as it lunged forward, everything went black, and I lost consciousness. But when I woke up, I was in the same room, the same bed, and I thought it had all been a dream, until I looked down at my arms and saw the same black symbols burned into my skin. And I understood then, with a horrifying clarity, that whatever it was, it had marked me, and I was no longer just a visitor in this cursed place. I had become part of it, and as I tried to escape, I realized that the house itself was alive, breathing, shifting, as though it had a mind of its own, and every time I tried to leave, the doors would close on me, locking me in, and the creature would return, always watching, always waiting, and no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran. The markings on my skin grew darker, deeper, and the whispers returned, louder now, urging me to let go, urging me to embrace what I had become. And it wasn't until that night, when I was cornered in the attic, staring into the eyes of the thing, that I understood this wasn't just a haunting, it was a cycle, a curse that would never end, a curse that was now mine to bear. And as the thing reached for me, I felt my body go cold, my breath shallow, and I knew that no matter how hard I fought, I was already dead, just another soul lost to the darkness of that cursed house. And when I finally surrendered, when I let the darkness swallow me whole, I woke up again, in the same room, with the same markings, and the footsteps started once more, and I knew then that this was my eternity now, that I would never escape, that I was bound to that house, bound to the thing that haunted it. And as the door slowly creaked open again, and I felt its cold presence at my back, I realized that there was no escape from this nightmare, and there never would be. Story 17. It was on that night, the kind of thick, oppressive darkness that felt alive, wrapping around me like an unseen hand, when I first heard the knock, a slow, rhythmic sound that echoed through the empty house, its hollow vibration sinking into my bones, making my heart race as I froze at the foot of the stairs, a place I knew better than the back of my hand, a place where countless hours of comfort had been spent. Yet now it felt as if something had shifted, something ancient, a presence that had lingered unseen for years, perhaps decades, now making itself known with that tap, 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 like a death knell softly calling to me from the hallway below. And I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The darkness around me seemed to pulse with a malevolent hunger as the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a cold sweat slicking my skin as I took a hesitant step forward, each movement slow and deliberate, not wanting to give in to the terror clawing at the edges of my mind. But still, I couldn't resist the pull, couldn't ignore the way the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier, the pressure mounting as I crept down the stairs, the old wood creaking beneath my feet as I descended, closer to the source of that haunting sound. Yet as I reached the bottom, the house fell into an eerie silence, the knock gone as if it had never been, leaving only a suffocating stillness that stretched out like an eternity before me, and I stood there, in the darkness, staring into the empty hallway. The light from the front door barely cutting through the shadows, and for a brief moment, I considered turning back, returning to the safety of the upper floor where I could lock myself away. But the thought of it, the thought of being trapped alone in that void, alone with whatever it was that had been knocking, that had been watching, held me in place, my feet frozen as the seconds ticked by. And then, as if on cue, a sharp, guttural sound ripped through the silence, like the scraping of metal against stone, a sound so deep, so unnatural, that it made my stomach turn, and I recoiled instinctively. But still, I could not move, could not look away, as from the corner of my eye, I saw something shift, something out of place. A shape moving against the walls, its form distorted, impossibly long limbs reaching out toward me, its head unnaturally tilted, like a broken doll twisted into something grotesque. And then, without warning, it lunged at me, its fingers brushing the back of my neck, sending a surge of cold terror through my spine as I staggered back, crashing into the wall with a deafening thud, and I spun around, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I scrambled to get to my feet. But that thing, was already gone, vanishing into the shadows as if it had never been there. And I stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened, yet nothing made sense, nothing except the sickening realization that I was not alone. That something that had once been human, had followed me, had been waiting for me, and in that instant, The house seemed to close in around me, its walls contracting, the air thick with the stench of rot, as I heard the sound again, a faint tapping. This time from upstairs, but this time, it was different, more frantic, more desperate, as if whatever it was that had been knocking, that had been waiting, was growing impatient. And I knew in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't hide, couldn't escape. And as I turned to face the stairs, I saw it, the thing, its twisted form standing at the top, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. And I knew that I had no choice, that I had to face it, that I had to face whatever nightmare had been unleashed within these walls. And so, with my heart pounding in my chest, my mind reeling with terror, I began to climb the stairs again, each step a laborious effort, my legs trembling beneath me as the house groaned in protest, the very air vibrating with a terrible energy. And when I reached the top, I found the hallway stretched before me, long and empty, but the door to the attic, the door I had never dared open, stood ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning from within. And I knew. Story 17. It was on that night, the kind of thick, oppressive darkness that felt alive, wrapping around me like an unseen hand, when I first heard the knock, a slow, rhythmic sound that echoed through the empty house, its hollow vibration sinking into my bones, making my heart race as I froze at the foot of the stairs, a place I knew better than the back of my hand, a place where countless hours of comfort had been spent. Yet now it felt as if something had shifted, something ancient, a presence that had lingered unseen for years, perhaps decades, now making itself known with that tap, 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 like a death knell softly calling to me from the hallway below. And I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The darkness around me seemed to pulse with a malevolent hunger as the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a cold sweat slicking my skin as I took a hesitant step forward, each movement slow and deliberate, not wanting to give in to the terror clawing at the edges of my mind. But still, I couldn't resist the pull, couldn't ignore the way the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier, the pressure mounting as I crept down the stairs, the old wood creaking beneath my feet as I descended. Story 18. I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I decided to take that late night walk. It was supposed to be something simple, a way to clear my head after a long and exhausting day. But I had no idea that my decision would lead to a night that would change my life forever, or maybe I should say, unchange it. Because after that night, I felt like a part of me was lost, maybe even erased, or perhaps it's still there, buried beneath whatever it was that took hold of me. So it started, innocently enough, my footsteps echoing in the quiet, familiar streets of my neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and you didn't expect much to happen after midnight, just the hum of streetlights and the rustling of trees in the cool breeze. But even the air felt different that night, heavy and still, like something was just waiting to happen. And as I passed the old church on the corner, I couldn't shake the strange sense of being watched, but I brushed it off as nothing more than a lingering thought, a product of exhaustion, or maybe the weird look someone had given me earlier that day in the grocery store. But as I continued down the path, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder just once, and when I did, there was nothing, not a soul in sight, not even the faintest shadow of movement, and yet the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. But I told myself it was just the wind, so I pushed forward, deeper into the darkness, past houses that had long been dark and silent, each one a tomb, and then I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the street, barely visible against the dim glow of a distant street lamp, its form almost blending with the shadows, and at first, I thought it might be a neighbor. Maybe someone walking their dog or taking a late-night stroll, but something in my gut told me otherwise, the way it stood there, still, unmoving, the shape of it strange and wrong, not like anything human. And then the strangest thing happened. The figure tilted its head ever so slightly, almost as though it had noticed my gaze, and I froze, unsure of what to do, because at that moment, I realized I had been holding my breath, afraid that if I exhaled too loudly, I might alert it. Whatever it was, that I was there. And for what felt like an eternity, the figure just stood there, unmoving, and I thought about turning back, running, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. And it wasn't until the figure finally moved, shifting into a slow, jerky motion, that I felt my heart leap into my throat, because what it did next wasn't natural, wasn't something any living thing should be able to do. It was as though it was stretching its limbs in ways they shouldn't bend, contorting in grotesque angles, and the sound it made as it moved, it wasn't like the usual sounds of someone walking or even shuffling. It was like the cracking of bones, like something trying to force its way out of a skin that didn't fit. And that's when I knew, deep down in the pit of my stomach, that whatever I was seeing wasn't human. It wasn't even alive in the way we understand life. It was something else, something twisted and dark, and as it took a step forward, I turned and ran. Ran faster than I ever thought possible, but no matter how fast my feet carried me, I could still hear it behind me, its footsteps, slow at first, but then faster, getting closer, and I could feel the presence of it right at my heels. The cold air that seemed to come from nowhere, wrapping around me like a suffocating fog, and as I rounded the corner, I stumbled, nearly falling, but I caught myself, my heart pounding in my chest, and when I dared to glance behind me, I saw nothing, just the empty street. But I didn't stop running, not until I reached my apartment, not until I was inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and then, for the first time, I allowed myself to look out the window, expecting to see nothing, expecting the night to be as calm and empty as it always was. But when I looked out, there, standing just beneath the flickering light of a street lamp, was the figure, still, staring up at me, and I knew, somehow, that it wasn't just watching me. It was waiting for something, waiting for me to make the next move, but I couldn't, because I could feel it, that terrible presence, like a dark weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, and all I could do was watch as it stood there, unmoving, its shape slowly blending with the shadows, as if it had never been there at all, but deep inside, I knew better, because whatever that thing was, it hadn't gone away, and it wouldn't. Not until it got what it was after, and over the next few days, strange things started happening, little things at first, things I could brush off, like the way my keys would go missing, only to turn up in the strangest places, or the way my phone would ring with unknown numbers, no one on the other end, just static. But then it escalated. One night, I woke up to find my window open, wide open, and I swear I had closed it before I went to bed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in my room, something that didn't belong, and the whispers started, faint at first, barely audible, but as the days passed, they grew louder, until I could hear them when I was alone in the apartment, their words indistinguishable, but full of a strange urgency, like they were calling me, beckoning me. And then, one evening, I found a note in my mailbox, a single piece of paper, folded neatly, with just one word written on it, soon, and that's when I realized that whatever had been watching me, whatever had been following me, was no longer just a shadow. It had found its way inside, and the worst part was, I didn't know what it wanted or how to stop it, and every night since then, I felt it, always there, always waiting, just beyond the edge of my perception, and no matter how much I try to ignore it, I can't, because it's still watching, still waiting, and now, I feel its presence more than ever, like something has finally moved into the space beside me, inside me, something dark and twisted. And the longer I go on without acknowledging it, the stronger it gets, and I know that one day, I'll turn around, and it will be standing there, right in front of me, and there won't be any escape. Story 19. It began with an old house at the edge of town. One of those places where the air always felt a little heavier, where the trees seemed to lean in closer and the ground was thick with the echoes of forgotten footsteps. But I never thought much of it, until the first night I found myself inside, lured by some inexplicable urge, a feeling I couldn't quite shake, as if the house itself had been calling to me, drawing me in like a moth to a flickering flame, and I can still hear the creak of the old wooden door as I pushed it open, the air within stagnant, the dust in the corners like the remnants of lives long past, and the faint scent of something almost sweet, like decay masked by the passage of time. But I didn't leave. No, not then. I stepped deeper into the darkness, the silence pressing in on me, the only sound the soft shuffle of my feet against the floorboards, which seemed to groan under my weight as though protesting my presence. But I kept going, pulled forward by that invisible hand, until I reached the living room, where an old armchair sat in the center, worn but somehow inviting, as if it was waiting for me. And when I sat down, I felt a sudden coldness envelop me, not a chill, but a coldness that seemed to seep into my very bones, something otherworldly, a presence, and I didn't realize at first, but the air grew thick, and the shadows, those deep, hungry shadows, seemed to stretch and shift, as though they were alive, creeping around the edges of the room, growing darker and deeper by the second, until I couldn't see the walls anymore, just the blackness closing in, and then the whispers started, faint at first, like a distant murmur just beyond my hearing, but they grew louder, clearer, until they were all around me. A constant drone that twisted my thoughts, blurred my sense of time, until I wasn't sure if I was awake or dreaming. And that's when I saw it, the shape in the corner. Crouching low, its outline barely visible against the black, but its eyes, they were the only thing that stood out, glowing with a faint, sickly light, yellow and hollow. And they stared at me, unblinking, with a hunger that made my blood run cold, and I froze, unable to move, to speak, to even breathe. And as I sat there, staring back into those eyes, I felt my thoughts slip away, my body growing heavier, my chest tight, as though something were pressing down on me, suffocating me from within. And then the thing in the corner, whatever it was, shifted, its body contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible, like a marionette whose strings were being pulled in every direction at once. And it moved closer, slowly, its mouth opening wide, impossibly wide, until it was a gaping, empty void, and it let out a sound, a low, guttural growl that reverberated in my skull, a noise that seemed to rattle the very foundations of the house. And that's when I realized, with a sinking sense of dread, that the whispers weren't just voices, they were the things that lived in the house, the things that had always been here, waiting. And the thing in the corner wasn't just a monster. It was a part of something far worse, something that had never left, something that had been feeding on the house, on me, on anyone who dared enter. And I tried to move, to run, but my limbs felt like they were frozen, my body betraying me, my mind caught in a haze. And then the air shifted again, thickening, becoming so dense that I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't feel anything but the suffocating presence of whatever was in the house with me. And it was everywhere now, surrounding me, crawling beneath my skin, invading my very thoughts, until I couldn't tell if I was the one in control anymore, or if it was the house, the thing in the corner, or something far worse. And in the midst of the panic, the terror, the crushing weight of it all, I heard a voice that wasn't mine, that came from deep inside, whispering, urging me to stay, to embrace the darkness, to let go. And I fought against the pull of whatever this thing was, but it was too strong, too insistent. And as the thing in the corner came closer, its eyes widening, its mouth stretching wider, wider until it was too much to bear. And in the final moment before I lost all sense of self, I felt the floor beneath me give way, the walls closing in, the house collapsing around me, and everything disappeared into the void. Story 20. I woke up to a strange, persistent knocking on my door, the kind that gnaws at the back of your skull, as though it's echoing from somewhere deep beneath the earth itself, each knock heavier than the last. And I knew immediately it wasn't the wind, wasn't a neighbor, no. It felt wrong, like something was trying to break through, something more than human. And as I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling of my small apartment, I wondered if I should ignore it, but I couldn't, because there was something about that sound, about the rhythm of it, that made my skin crawl. The way the knocks seemed to slow down in between, like someone was taking a breath, gathering strength to knock again. And then finally, I stood, moved toward the door, almost against my own will, reaching for the doorknob, feeling the cold metal under my fingertips. But before I could turn it, I heard it, the sound of something scraping across the wood on the other side. Slow, deliberate, the noise jagged, like nails on a chalkboard, only far worse. And my hand froze, my heartbeat quickened, and the air around me seemed to grow thicker, oppressive, like something was pressing in from all sides, trying to smother me. And as I stood there, paralyzed, the scraping continued, almost like a whisper, but not a whisper I recognized. And before I could gather myself, before I could take a step back, the door creaked open, slowly, agonizingly, and there was nothing there, not even a shadow, just the emptiness of my hallway stretching out before me. But the air, it was thick now, unnatural, and I knew something was wrong. Something was waiting, something that didn't belong in this world. And as I peered into the darkness, I saw it. The faint outline of a figure at the end of the hall, too tall, too thin. And I should have run, should have slammed the door shut and locked every window, but I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from it. And the figure began to move, its limbs jerking unnaturally, twisting as it came closer. And in that moment, the world around me seemed to dissolve, the walls of my apartment fading, everything narrowing down to that creature, to the horrible certainty that whatever it was here for me. And then it spoke, not with words, but with a voice that was more like a sensation, a feeling that hit me in my chest, like something cold and sharp slicing through my ribs, and I could feel it in my bones, the weight of its presence, and the voice, or whatever it was, began to repeat one thing over and over, a single word that made my stomach twist, made by rise in my throat, open. And I knew then that I wasn't meant to survive this night, that whatever this thing was, it had come for me, and I was powerless to stop it. But even as the fear overwhelmed me, I fought it, tried to push the door shut, but my hand wouldn't obey, and I felt it, a cold, clammy pressure on my wrist, pulling me back, and I looked down, expecting to see a hand, a claw, but there was nothing, just the pressure, like something invisible was holding me, and the whispering continued, rising, louder now, pressing into my skull, and the air tasted sour, bitter, like something old and rotting, and I could barely breathe, barely think. And as the figure came closer, its outline shifting, flickering like a broken film reel, I finally screamed. But it didn't matter, because the sound of my voice was swallowed by the darkness, consumed, and then I felt the cold again, a gust of icy air sweeping over me, like something was drawing the warmth from my body, and I could feel my limbs growing heavier, my heart thumping in my chest, and I wanted to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there, paralyzed. But the figure was closer now, so close I could smell it, the stench of decay and damp earth, and then I saw its eyes, or at least, what should have been eyes. Black voids that seemed to pull everything around them, and the pressure on my wrist tightened, pulling me toward it, toward those empty pits, and I couldn't escape, couldn't look away, and then it spoke again, and this time, it was different, clearer, and its words filled my mind, wrapped around me like chains, telling me things I couldn't understand, things I didn't want to know, but I heard them anyway, and they burned into my brain, and the walls of the apartment began to warp, bend, as though reality itself was breaking apart, and then I was falling into the void behind its eyes, and I could feel myself losing grip on everything, on who I was, and as I tumbled into the blackness, I felt something cold and smooth wrap around me, something that wasn't air, that wasn't anything natural, and I gasped, tried to scream, but the sound was gone, and then I was in darkness, true darkness, a place where no light could reach, no sound could escape, and I was alone, trapped, suspended in a nothingness that felt like an eternity. But then, out of nowhere, there was a sound, a faint whisper that cut through the silence, and I wanted to turn toward it, wanted to follow it, because something deep in my gut told me it was my only chance, but the whisper faded, and the darkness pressed closer, suffocating me, and in that moment, I realized the horrible truth. I had never left my apartment at all, that whatever I had encountered, it had never been anything outside my door, it had always been inside, and now it was part of me. And as the darkness closed in, the whispers started again, this time louder, clearer, and I could feel it, the pressure building again, like something was trying to crush me from all sides, and the whispers were growing, their meaning unraveling, until all that was left was the same word over and over, a single syllable that filled my skull and replaced every thought in my mind. Open. And in that instant, I understood. I had opened the door, let it in, and now there was no escape, no salvation, no light. The darkness wasn't something I could fight. It was already inside me, waiting to consume me, to drag me down into the endless void where nothing existed but that one word, open. Story 21. It was late one evening when I first noticed the house at the end of the street, an old, dilapidated structure that had been abandoned for as long as I could remember, though no one in town ever seemed to mention it. The windows were clouded with grime, the door barely hanging on its hinges, and the air around it always seemed unnaturally still, a kind of silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up whenever I walked past, though I never really paid it much attention, chalking it up to the natural disrepair of old buildings. However, on that particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first hints of twilight began to creep in, I felt something strange, something almost oppressive, draw me closer. As if an invisible thread was tugging at my very soul, compelling me to step forward toward the door, which I now saw was ever so slightly ajar, though it hadn't been when I last passed it just that morning. And as I reached out to push the door open, a chill wind seemed to rush out, colder than anything I had ever felt, as though it had been locked inside the house for decades, and the musty smell of old wood and something far worse, something rot-like, filled my lungs, making me gag and my stomach churn. But it wasn't enough to stop me. Curiosity, something darker than fear, kept me moving forward, my feet carrying me into the dim hallway, where shadows clung to the walls, thick and unnerving, like they were alive, shifting and stretching as if to reach for me. But I told myself it was just my imagination, just the way the setting sun filtered through the dust in the air, making the whole place feel more sinister than it probably was. But even as I thought this, my footsteps grew louder in the stillness, echoing around me like a warning I couldn't escape. And then, just as I turned a corner into a small, cramped room, I saw it. No, I felt it first, the unmistakable sensation that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me from the dark corners of the room, though at first, my eyes could make out nothing, just a blackness that seemed to suck the light from the room like a hole, an empty space that shouldn't exist. But then, when I finally caught a glimpse of something, a figure, standing unnaturally still in the farthest corner, its shape barely discernible, a silhouette too perfect, too unnatural to be human, and yet, I knew it was, somehow, because it was watching me with a presence so intense, so full of malice, that I could feel my heart rate spike, my blood pounding in my ears as my instincts screamed at me to run. But my legs refused to obey, frozen in place as I stared at the figure, my breath catching in my throat as it suddenly stepped forward. Its movement slow and deliberate, like it was savoring my terror. And then it spoke, though its voice was barely more than a rasp, a whisper from the depths of the earth itself, telling me that I had been chosen, that the house had been waiting for me, that it had seen me for a long time, but now it would take me, body and soul. And as it advanced, I stumbled backward, my mind racing, but my feet still rooted to the floor, the air thickening with something heavier than fear. Like the very atmosphere was pressing in on me, suffocating me with its presence, and the figure reached out, a hand, no, a claw, like a shadow made flesh, and I could feel its icy touch just an inch from my skin, and I closed my eyes, hoping it would go away, hoping it would all just vanish. But when I opened them again, the figure was gone, and for a moment, I thought I was safe, that I had imagined it all. But then I heard the creak of the floorboards behind me, and slowly turned to see a reflection in the mirror, my own face, but distorted, twisted into something grotesque, its eyes hollow and black, its smile too wide, and I could see it in my own reflection, something that wasn't me, something evil, and I screamed. But the sound was swallowed by the house, and when I turned back around, the room was empty, but I knew deep in my gut, that I was not alone, that whatever had been watching me was still there, still lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for me to fall victim to the same dread that had claimed everyone before me. And I knew, in that moment, that I was no longer just a visitor in this house, but its next occupant, its next victim. And as I stumbled backward, my vision began to blur, my head swimming with vertigo as the shadows seemed to shift and distort around me, twisting and pulling in on themselves like they were alive. And that's when I heard it again, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer, and I turned, my heart hammering in my chest as I saw the figure step back into view, this time closer, its features clearer, and I could make out the hollow, empty eyes, the skin stretched tight over its skull, the grin that had no place on a human face. And it took another step, then another, until it was so close, I could feel the cold radiating from its body, like it was made of ice. And then it opened its mouth, not to speak, but to let out a low, guttural growl, and I froze, unable to move, unable to scream as it loomed over me. And the last thing I remember is the sensation of being lifted off the ground, the darkness closing in around me like a vice, and I knew, deep down, that I had been taken, that I was never going to leave this place. And when I awoke, I was still in the house. But everything had changed. The walls were slick with moisture, the air thick with decay, and the silence had grown even heavier, more suffocating, as if the house itself had become a living thing, feeding on the fear of anyone who dared enter. And I couldn't find my way out, no matter how hard I tried. And all I could do was wander through the endless rooms, listening to the sound of my own breathing, the only sound left in the house, as I realized with growing horror that I was now a part of it, and that nothing would ever escape this place, not me, not anyone. Story 22. The night had been unusually still, the kind of eerie silence that seemed too perfect, too unnatural, as though the very air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. And that something came in the form of a knock at my door, a soft, almost tentative tap that echoed in my chest, making my heart skip a beat, because I hadn't been expecting anyone. In fact, I hadn't had a visitor in months, and for good reason, I suppose, as the house I lived in, an old Victorian with creaky floorboards and windows that rattled with every gust of wind, had an aura about it, an aura that repelled most. And yet here I was, standing in my dimly lit hallway, staring at the door as if I could somehow will away the stranger on the other side. But no, the knocking persisted. 3 taps, followed by an eerie pause, like whoever was out there knew I was alone, knew I had no choice but to answer, and against all my instincts. Against the gnawing sense of dread crawling up my spine, I found myself walking toward the door, my feet seemingly moving of their own accord, my hand gripping the cold brass handle as I opened it. And there, standing in the doorway, was a figure that at first glance seemed almost comical. A lanky man wearing a tattered coat that looked as if it had been weathered by years of neglect, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, his posture hunched in a way that suggested something wasn't quite right, and for a moment, I thought I'd mistaken him for some sort of wandering salesman or an oddball neighbor, but the look in his eyes, those hollow, empty eyes that seemed to pierce right through me, told me that I was wrong, so very wrong, and before I could say a word, before I could slam the door shut in his face, he spoke, his voice low, raspy, as though he hadn't used it in years. "I'm looking for someone," he said, and I felt a chill run through me, a deep, unnatural cold that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. "I'm looking for you," he continued, his words lingering in the air like the stench of decay. "I've been searching for you a long time," and my mouth went dry, my throat constricting as my heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing to make sense of what he was saying, because I didn't know this man, didn't recognize him, and yet there was something about his presence, something about the way he stood there, so still, so deliberate, that made me feel like I was standing face to face with something ancient, something predatory, and before I could ask who he was or why he was here, he took a step forward, his foot dragging across the worn welcome mat, and the door seemed to close on its own accord, the sound of it creaking as if it had been forced to move. And when I tried to push it open again, I found that I couldn't, as though an invisible weight had settled on the other side, keeping it shut, and I stepped back, panic setting in, my breath quickening as I felt my pulse throbbing in my ears, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, but when I looked down, I realized my phone was gone, vanished without a trace, and my head began to spin as the world around me seemed to tilt. The shadows in the corners of the room growing longer, more twisted, until the figure at the door was no longer just a man, but something darker, something far more menacing, and in that instant, I understood that whatever had been knocking at my door was not human, not, in any sense of the word, and as I stood there, paralyzed, unable to speak or move, I heard a whisper from the darkness, a voice that was his but not his, a voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "You can't escape," it said, "you never could." And then the door shuddered violently, rattling in its frame as though something large and heavy was pressing against it from the other side, and I backed away, my eyes fixed on the door, my mind screaming at me to run, to get out, but my body refused to obey, and as the seconds dragged on, each one heavier than the last, I could feel the air around me growing thicker, colder, like I was being suffocated by something unseen, something monstrous, and then there was a sound, faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but it grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and they were coming toward me, and I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't alone anymore, that whatever was on the other side of that door had crossed the threshold, and I could feel it now, in my very bones, creeping closer, filling the room with its presence, and before I could react, before I could even think, the figure stepped into the room, and the air itself seemed to recoil from him, as if even it was afraid, and when I looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time, I saw it, the way his features seemed to shift, as though his face was not a face at all, but a mask that was slowly peeling away to reveal something beneath, something that defied all logic, all reason, and in that moment, I knew that I wasn't just facing a man, I wasn't just facing some petty thief or murderer. No, I was facing something older, something that had no business being in this world, something that had been waiting, watching, for the right moment to strike, and then, with a sound that could only be described as the scraping of nails on glass, the mask tore away entirely, revealing a featureless face, a face that was nothing but smooth, gray skin, and behind that face, I saw it, the thing that had been lurking in the shadows, the thing that had been waiting for me, and before I could scream, before I could even run, the darkness swallowed me whole, and everything went silent again, silent and still, just as it had been before, except now, I was the one who had become part of the silence, lost to it, swallowed by it, never to return. Story 23. It all started on the night I decided to take a shortcut through the woods, something I'd done 100 times before without a second thought. The cool autumn air pushing against my skin as the last rays of sunlight bled into the horizon, leaving an eerie gray haze in the sky. But this time was different. I felt it the moment I stepped off the familiar trail, the chill running deeper than the weather would explain, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me as I moved, every crack of a branch beneath my boots or rustle in the underbrush sending shivers up my spine. But I told myself I was just being paranoid. The woods at night had always seemed more alive than I remembered, with their dark shadows stretching unnaturally long under the pale light of the crescent moon. And as I walked, a low, almost imperceptible hum began to fill the air, like the buzzing of a swarm of insects or an electrical current just beneath the surface. But I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything but the wind, and yet I couldn't help but feel like the woods had closed in on me, the air growing heavy with something unnatural, something that shouldn't have been there. And it wasn't long before I realized I wasn't alone. Not in the way I thought I would be, no, not a predator or a lost traveler, but something far darker, something that lived between the trees, moving just out of sight as I kept walking, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. I caught a flicker of movement ahead, too fast to fully register, but enough to make my heart race. A tall shadow slipping between the trunks, its shape long and twisted, not quite human, but close, the air growing cold as if the warmth of the world had been sucked away. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps following me, deliberate and slow, each step echoing louder than the last. And when I turned, nothing, only the thick trees, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. But I could feel its presence, like something had crawled out from the depths of the earth and was now toying with me, a sick game that I couldn't escape. I kept walking faster, then running, my heart pounding in my chest as my breath came in short gasps, my legs burning. But every time I looked back, the footsteps were closer, the air heavier, the shadows thicker, until finally I reached the clearing, the moonlight spilling over the ground, and for a moment I thought I was safe. But that was when I saw it, standing at the far edge of the clearing, barely visible in the dark, a creature that was neither man nor beast, its skin pale and stretched too tight over bones that seemed to jut out at odd angles. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, like twin lanterns burning in the dark, and its mouth, oh God, its mouth was wide, far too wide, filled with jagged teeth that gleamed in the moonlight, and it grinned at me, a slow, deliberate motion that sent a wave of cold dread crashing over me. And in that moment, I knew, deep down, that I wasn't just dealing with something of this world, that this was something ancient, something born of the earth's deepest fears. And as it took a step forward, its fingers stretching out like twisted vines reaching for me, I turned and ran with all the strength I had left. But it didn't matter. No matter how fast I ran, how much I pushed myself, I couldn't outrun it, couldn't escape it. And when the forest around me seemed to close in, a fog rolling, and thick and suffocating, I realized too late that the woods were alive, that the very earth itself had become part of the trap, and it was only a matter of time before it would claim me too, a feeling of vertigo washing over me as I stumbled, my legs giving out beneath me. And in that moment of weakness, I heard it, the softest whisper, like whine through the trees. But it was more than that. It was a voice, faint, distant, but unmistakable, calling my name, and I didn't even have to look to know that it was behind me, getting closer, the weight of its presence pressing down on me like a vice, suffocating. And I knew that if I turned around, if I looked at it one more time, I wouldn't just be swallowed by the darkness. I'd become part of it. And I didn't know how long I'd been running, or how long I'd been lost. But when I finally collapsed, the ground soft beneath me like it was made of something unnatural, I thought for just a moment that I was safe, that the creature had gone. But then the world went silent. So silent I could hear my own pulse hammering in my ears, and that was when I felt it, cold fingers brushing the back of my neck. And then the world erupted in pain, sharp and burning, as though my very soul was being torn apart. And in that moment, I realized what it was, what it wanted, and that I would never leave those woods alive, never see the daylight again, because this place, this cursed, ancient earth, would claim me just like it had claimed the countless others before me, and I would be trapped here, forever a part of the shadows, lost to the dark, to the forest that hungers for souls. And the last thing I felt was its twisted grip tightening around my throat, squeezing until the world went black, leaving only the sound of the wind, the whispers of the trees, and the faint, distant echo of footsteps that would never stop chasing. Story 24. It started on a night like any other, the kind where the quiet seemed to stretch endlessly, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind outside. But as I sat there in the dimly lit room, something about the silence felt wrong, too wrong. Almost like it was pressing in on me from all sides, like the very air around me had thickened, become heavier with something unseen and malevolent. And I shook it off at first, tried to laugh it off as just the creeping paranoia that always set in when I was alone for too long. But then I heard it, soft, barely audible, a whispering sound, like something or someone scraping against the walls just beyond the reach of my vision. So faint it could have been my imagination playing tricks on me. But the longer I listened, the more distinct it became, like a voice trying to make itself heard, though I couldn't understand the words, and I thought maybe it was just the old house settling, the floorboards creaking or the wind catching on the shutters. But it was more than that. Something in the way the sound slid through the cracks of the room, something unnatural, and when I stood up to investigate, I felt that cold prickle of dread creeping up my spine, that awareness that I was being watched. Not just by something in the shadows, but by something that knew I was there. And I hesitated at the door, hand hovering over the knob, not sure if I should open it or lock myself in. But I couldn't stop myself from turning it, couldn't stop my feet from carrying me down the hall toward the source of the noise, each step slow and deliberate, as if the house itself were trying to keep me from reaching whatever lay beyond the walls. And when I rounded the corner, I saw it. The hallway stretched out before me, empty. But there, at the very end, something was moving, a flicker in the darkness, like a shadow shifting where no shadow should be. And for a moment, I thought it was just a trick of the light, the dim bulb flickering overhead casting strange shapes. But then I saw it again, a figure, tall and hunched, its body jerking unnaturally with every movement, like it was broken in some way. And my heart slammed into my chest as it seemed to sense me, its head snapping around, its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowing with an otherworldly light. In the instant they locked onto mine, I felt it, a crushing weight, as though the very air had become solid, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, frozen in place by the force of its gaze. And it was then I knew with a horrible certainty that whatever it wasn't human, wasn't something that belonged in this world. And before I could even scream, it was gone, disappearing into the shadows, its presence lingering in the air like a toxic mist. But the silence returned, thicker now, more oppressive, and I backed away, heart pounding in my ears, trying to make sense of what I had just seen, trying to convince myself it was some sort of hallucination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't, that whatever it was had been real, and it had wanted me to see it, to know it was there. And I ran back to my room, locking the door behind me, but even as I did, I could hear it again, the whispering, only now it was louder, more urgent, more frantic, as though it were trying to get in, to reach me, and the walls seemed to close in around me, the very air thick with dread, as if the house itself were alive, suffocating me with its dark presence. And I felt my mind start to unravel, the fear clawing at the edges of my sanity. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't tear my eyes away from the door, couldn't stop myself from listening for that sound, that horrible scraping, that whispering that was never quite clear, but always close, always just behind me. And then it came again, but this time, it wasn't from the door, it was from inside the room with me, a low growl, like something hungry, like something in the dark that had been waiting for the right moment. And I froze, not daring to move, not daring to breathe, as I slowly turned my head, my eyes scanning the room. And that's when I saw it, standing in the corner, its outline barely visible in the gloom, its body twisted in ways that made my stomach churn, its limbs too long, too thin, its mouth hanging open in a grin that stretched too wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. And the smell that filled the room was nauseating, like rotting flesh, like something decaying. And I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I couldn't make a sound, as if my voice had been stolen by the sheer terror of its presence. And it stepped forward, its movement a grotesque mockery of a person, its limbs jerking as if they weren't meant to bend that way. And I tried to move, tried to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate, my body refusing to obey. And all I could do was stare, helpless, as it came closer, its eyes never leaving mine. And then it spoke, but the voice, it wasn't a voice at all. It was like something tearing through the fabric of reality itself, a screeching, tearing sound that rattled my bones, and I couldn't understand the words. But I knew what it wanted. I knew it was asking me to follow, to come with it, to leave the world of the living behind and step into whatever nightmare lay beyond. And in that moment, I understood. This thing, whatever it was not just from the shadows, it was a part of the shadows. A part of the dark places where the forgotten things go, the places where nothing is meant to be, and I was meant to be there with it, to join it in that void where time had no meaning, where death was just another form of existence, and I wanted to scream again, wanted to fight, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. As it reached out to me, its fingers long and sharp, like claws, and I felt its touch, cold, like ice, like the grave, and it was then that the door to my room slammed open, and I heard voices, human voices, shouting my name, calling me, but I couldn't look away from the creature, couldn't tear my gaze from the abyss it had shown me, and as the voices grew louder, the creature's grip tightened, its fingers digging into my skin, and everything went black, the world around me unraveling into nothingness. And when I woke, I was lying on the floor of my room, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath, but the room was empty, silent, and for a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, some twisted nightmare, but then I saw it, a mark on my arm, deep in red, like a brand, like something had marked me, and I knew, deep in my bones, that it wasn't over, that it would never be over, that whatever had been with me that night was still here, still waiting, still watching, and I couldn't escape it, not now, not ever. Story 25. In the decaying silence of a forgotten forest where even the birds had long stopped singing, a man named Elias wandered deeper than he'd ever dared, drawn by the whispers in the wind that had haunted his dreams for weeks. Unearthly murmurs that slipped through the cracks of sleep and left the taste of iron and rot on his tongue. And now, among the trees that seemed to lean in closer with every step, he felt those same whispers brushing against his ears as though the forest itself was exhaling. Secrets meant only for him. The deeper he walked, the more unnatural everything became. As if the world had stopped following rules, the sun hung motionless in a dull, jaundiced sky while the moss underfoot squelched like raw meat, pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. And every so often he caught movement at the edges of his vision, twitching things with too many limbs, skinless figures melting into bark, eyes blinking open from the ground, and he kept walking, unable to stop, because something in him knew that turning back would make him part of the forest forever. By the time he reached the clearing, if you could call a ring of bone-white trees circling a pit of darkness a clearing, he could barely remember why he had come, only that he had to keep going. And when he peered into the pit, it peered back, not with eyes, but with an awareness that spread across his mind like ink in water, unraveling his thoughts and stitching new ones in their place, memories of lives he never lived and deaths he never died, of fire underground and teeth that reached from the sky, of screaming that never left the lungs because the air itself was afraid, and before he could scream, he was falling not down but into himself. Into a memory that wasn't his but felt more real than his entire life, a memory of being bound in roots and fed to something that wore a face made of other faces, always shifting, always weeping, and when he awoke, if you could call it that, he wasn't Elias anymore. Not truly, though he wore the skin well enough. The villagers noticed he came back wrong, not just thinner or paler but off, like he breathed in reverse or blinked at the wrong times, like he was always listening to something no one else could hear. And they whispered about the forest and the curse and the stories their grandparents told with trembling voices, but it was too late, because Elias, what used to be Elias, had begun to speak in the old tongue, a rasping click-click shitter that summoned shadows and daylight and made milk curdle in the breast, and the forest began to change too. Trees bent unnaturally toward the village, animals were born wrong or not at all, and the dreams began to spread, first to the children, then to the dogs, then to the weather itself, which wept blood onto the crops that refused to grow. They tried to burn the forest, but the fire screamed and ran backward, swallowing itself, and the wind laughed like a child in pain. And still Elias stood at the edge of the trees each night, unmoving, unblinking, watching, whispering, waiting for what? No one could say, only that the night grew longer and the stars no longer aligned, and people began to disappear, first in ones and twos, then in whole families. Houses left with meals still warm and clocks still ticking. Only the ticks were out of rhythm, ticking to a heartbeat that wasn't human. When they finally stormed the forest with torches and prayer, they found nothing but ash and silence and the pit, which had grown wider, deeper, darker, and they knew better than to look in, except for one, always one, whose dreams were loudest, who had heard the call clearest, who stepped forward as if pulled by puppet strings made of whispers, and with a smile far too wide, dropped into the dark, while far below, something smiled back and sighed with satisfaction, another piece of itself returning home, another mask to wear, another voice to use, and above, the trees creaked open their mouths and began to sing. Story 26. It began with the scraping sound beneath the floorboards that I convinced myself was just old pipes or maybe mice until the night it started talking to me, whispering in a voice that sounded like mine, only older and hollow, promising secrets in exchange for attention. So I stayed up, ear to the dusty wood, heart pounding, and listened as it told me things no one should know, things about my past and things that hadn't happened yet, until I found myself moving furniture aside, pulling up boards, tearing out insulation to find the space below wasn't a crawl space at all, but a tunnel dug by someone or something, with fingers that left claw marks in the dirt and symbols scratched into the beams like warnings or invitations. And though every instinct told me to stop, to run, I descended with nothing but a flashlight and the breathless thrill of knowing that if I turned back now, I would never sleep again without hearing it call my name. And as I crept through that earthen tunnel, the air, thick and wet, I found scraps of things, a baby's shoe, a cracked porcelain doll head, teeth, and I should have left then. I know I should have, but the whispers were louder now, clearer, guiding me to a narrow room hollowed from the soil, lit dimly by a glow that didn't come from any source I could see. And there it was, a mirror, filthy and tall, too tall for the space it occupied, and in its reflection, I didn't see myself but a version of me, skin too pale, smile too wide, gesturing for me to come closer, closer, until I felt the cold glass and realized it wasn't glass at all but a membrane I could push through. And I did, because the reflection promised freedom, promised truth, and when I stepped through, I was no longer underground but standing in my bedroom, except everything was subtly wrong, the colors dull, the silence heavy, and in the mirror behind me, I could see my body still in the tunnel, staring back with glassy eyes while something inside it smiled at me, a slow, knowing curl of the lips that told me I'd made a terrible mistake, and I screamed, but no sound came, just the crackle of static and the hum of nothingness, and then came the knocking, soft at first, then louder, rhythmic, and patient from the inside of my closet. And I knew if I opened it, I'd see the thing that had taken my place, the thing living my life, speaking to my friends, looking through my eyes, and I couldn't let that happen. So I ran, not out of the house, but to the basement, to the breaker box, ripping wires, plunging the place into darkness, thinking maybe that would break the spell, maybe light had something to do with its power, but the dark didn't help. It only let me hear better, hear the footsteps above, slow and deliberate, as it moved room to room calling for me, calling itself by my name. And then came the sound of laughter, low and full, not my voice, but mine all the same, and I pressed myself against the wall and tried to remember the way back to the tunnel. But there was no tunnel anymore, just smooth concrete, seamless, like it had never been disturbed, and I realized that it had lured me in, not just to trap me, but to replace me, to feed on my life, my memories, and grow stronger. And the worst part was knowing no one would notice, not really. People are too distracted, too polite, too afraid to ask why their friend's smile never quite reaches their eyes anymore, or why they hum songs no one's heard before, or why pets shy away, or mirrors crack when they pass. And I'm still here, somewhere behind the walls, screaming silently in every reflection, every distorted screen, hoping someone will see, will understand, will break the mirror, or dig beneath the floor, or just listen when they hear that whisper in the dark. Because it's not just me, it's hungry, and it's growing, and it needs more faces, more voices, more lives to wear like clothes. And each time someone ignores the knock at the closet door or pretends the reflection didn't just blink, out of sync, it learns, it adapts, and soon there'll be no difference at all between the real and the reflected. And when that day comes, when we're all replaced, you won't even know it happened. You'll think everything is fine as you wave to your neighbors, smile at your family, stare into your bathroom mirror and say your name just to see if the reflection says it too. And by the time you realize it doesn't, by the time it starts smiling before you do, it'll be too late, because that sound, under the floor, that whisper behind the drywall, that chill when you're alone, it's not imagination, it's not dreams, it's the other you waiting, always waiting, for your moment of weakness, for your fear, for the second you listen too long or look too closely. And then it comes through, inch by inch, breath by breath, until you feel your own reflection watching you sleep, practicing your laugh, slipping into your skin like a glove, and when it finally takes over, you'll still be there, deep inside, a ghost in your own body, screaming forever without a voice, just like me. Story 27. It started with the scratching, faint at first, like a branch dragged across a window, but there were no trees outside, no branches within reach, and when I went to the glass to see, I caught my reflection looking back at me with a slight delay, barely noticeable if I hadn't been staring so hard. And I told myself it was just tired eyes, just my imagination running a little too fast. But then the scratching came again that night, louder, closer, like something or someone was testing the limits of my home, of my sanity, and I didn't sleep, just lay there with the covers drawn to my chin, listening, heart hammering so loud I thought it might drown out whatever noise was coming from the other side of the walls. And the next morning there were marks, long and thin like claw trails, not on the outside, but inside the window, on the glass I had cleaned the day before. And the air felt different in the house, thicker, like I was breathing through gauze soaked in mildew, and the smell, God. That smell, something like rot mixed with wet copper, clung to every room no matter how many candles I lit, how much I scrubbed. And I asked my landlord if anyone had died here, jokingly at first, but he just looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You signed the waiver," before walking away. And I didn't remember any waiver, just a lease. But when I dug through the paperwork I saw it, a section in small print, barely legible, referring to unexplained disturbances and a non-liability clause. And that night the scratching didn't wait for the dark. It started just after sunset, followed by a low, wet breathing, as if someone was pressed against the other side of the wall, inhaling me. And I tried to tell myself it was mice. Maybe raccoons in the attic, but I knew better because raccoons don't whisper, and this thing whispered my name, slowly, syllable by syllable, not with a human voice, but something that sounded like cartilage and teeth trying to mimic one. And when I moved to the guest room, the noises followed. When I stayed at a friend's, the dreams began, deep, suffocating dreams of hallways that bent in impossible directions, of faces half-formed with mouths too wide and eyes that blinked sideways. And I always woke with the taste of soil in my mouth and fingernails black with dirt I couldn't explain. And when I asked my friend if I had left in the night, she said yes, that she saw me standing outside by her garden just watching the house, not moving, not answering when she called, just staring. And when she came out to grab me, I wasn't there. But my footprints were, deep and raw in the frost-bitten grass, barefoot even though I'd gone to bed with socks, and I started to notice the smell clinging to my clothes. The faint bruises around my wrist in the shape of hands too long, too thin, and my reflection, my God, my reflection, began to move differently, lagging just a little more each day, until one night it smiled when I didn't, smiled wide and slow and deliberate, and its teeth were longer, too sharp, too clean, and I screamed. But no sound came out, only a low hiss, like air being let from a balloon, and the lights flickered, and when they returned, the reflection was normal again, like nothing had happened. And I convinced myself again it was stress, sleep deprivation, some kind of break in my mind. And I saw doctors. I took pills. They made the dreams worse, more vivid, and one night I woke in the hallway, hand pressed flat against the wall, mouthing words I didn't know in a language I couldn't replicate when I tried. And I saw something scurry just behind me in the mirror, a long-limbed shadow crawling across the ceiling upside down, disappearing when I turned. And I checked the attic, the basement, every inch of the house, but found nothing, just the faint echo of breathing that didn't belong to me. And the walls began to pulse, almost like they were alive, like the house itself was growing, shifting subtly. The rooms just slightly longer or shorter than the day before, doors in places they weren't meant to be, and I stopped trusting the layout, started marking rooms with chalk, and one day the marks were gone, every one of them, scrubbed clean without a trace. And the scratching grew bolder, became gouging, like claws digging through wood, and I found pieces of something under my bed, scraps of what looked like leather but stretched too thin to be animal skin, and they were warm, slightly damp, like they had just been shed. And I started hearing a voice in the pipes, whispering in bursts every time I ran water, and I stopped showering, stopped washing dishes, until the sink filled with slime and flies that didn't die no matter how much poison I sprayed. And then came the knocking, 3 slow knocks at the door at exactly 3:33 a.m., every night without fail, and when I opened it, there was nothing, no one, only a shadow across the floor that didn't belong to anything I could see. And once, when I closed it, I saw fingers retreating up the wall, impossibly long and jointed in too many places, and I boarded the door, nailed it shut, but the knocks kept coming, echoing from inside the walls instead, and I screamed until my throat was raw. But no one came, no one ever came, and I realized the street was too quiet, the world outside muted, like the house had been moved somewhere else, folded between dimensions or sunk into the earth, and when I checked my phone, there were no messages. No service, only a photo I didn't take, me, asleep, with something standing over me, its face bent too close to mine, smiling with a mouth that split all the way up its cheeks, and its hand, God, its hand, was reaching into my chest. And I swear I could feel it then, right then, even while awake, something inside me being touched, rearranged, pulled taut like a string, and the house groaned around me like it was breathing, like it was enjoying this, and the whispers became voices, all versions of my own, some crying, some laughing, some begging, and they never stopped, not even when I tore out every vent, every pipe, every outlet. They just grew louder, clearer, and one day I looked outside and there was no sky, just a swirling black void, pulsing, watching. And when I tried to leave the front door, I ended up back in the basement, no matter how many times I opened it, always back at the bottom of the stairs, and the lights flickered out one by one until I lived in darkness, a wet, suffocating dark where my eyes adjusted and I began to see the things moving in the corners, the pale shapes with twisted limbs and no mouths, only hands, always reaching, and the air was filled with a low hum like 1,000 flies trapped in a jar, and I stopped fighting it. Stopped trying to escape, because there's no way out, not really, just other rooms, other versions of this place where I live and die and live again. And I think I've died 1,000 times in this house already. I just don't remember most of them, only the echoes, only the dread that comes when the sun sets and I realize it's starting again, always starting again. And I know now the scratching isn't something trying to get in. It's trying to get out, and maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the thing in the walls now. Maybe I've always been. Maybe you hear me too, late at night, when your house creaks and the shadows bend. Maybe I'm already there with you, watching, waiting, scratching. Story 28. The forest had no name on any map, a patch of darkness nestled between forgotten hills and roads no longer driven. And yet, when Jeremy's grandfather died and left him the old cabin out there, something compelled him to go, not sentiment. For he barely knew the man, just a pulsing curiosity in his blood, a whisper he only heard in dreams. And so he drove for hours until the signal on his phone disappeared. The trees thickened like a clenched fist, and the gravel crunched beneath tires like ancient bones, the air becoming heavier as he turned off the engine and stepped into a silence so complete it rang in his ears, not a bird or insect, just the hollow thud of his boots on the rotting porch boards. And as he unlocked the door with the rusted key, the wood resisted like a body pressed against it, creaking wide to reveal a room thick with dust and shadows that moved just slightly when he wasn't looking, the air smelling of wet earth and something sweetly decayed, the fireplace. Blackened, the walls lined with books so old their titles had melted into the leather, and yet one sat on the table, fresh and out of place, a journal with his name etched on the cover, the ink glistening like blood, and when he opened it, the pages were full, written in his own handwriting, though he had never seen it before, filled with dates and memories that weren't his, warnings about them, about the forest watching, learning, waiting for him to return, and the last entry, dated tomorrow. Read simply, "Don't stay the third night." He laughed, nervously, brushing it off as an elaborate prank or coincidence. But that night, the dream came again, clearer than before, the girl with the stitch-shut eyes standing at the foot of his bed, whispering in a voice like cracking ice. Don't look in the mirror after dark, and when he awoke, the mirror in the hallway, covered in a dusty sheet when he arrived, was uncovered, and a handprint smudged the glass, too large to be his own, long-fingered, nails like splinters, and though he tried to leave the next morning, the road twisted in on itself, each turn bringing him back to the cabin, no matter how far he drove, no matter how many paths he tried, until he stopped pretending he was in control and went back, just to wait it out, just to make it through 2 nights, and maybe everything would reset, like a fever dream fading. But on the second night, the whispers began in the walls, soft at first, like rats in the beams, then louder, more insistent, voices calling him by name, accusing, begging, threatening, voices of people he recognized, his mother, his old teacher, a girl he once saw die in a car accident, until he screamed at them to shut up and silence returned like a switch flipped, too sudden, too complete. And then the floorboards groaned upstairs, slow footsteps pacing in a room he hadn't opened yet, the one with the lock on the outside, and something inside began to knock, steadily, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. And when it stopped, the door swung, opened by itself, revealing nothing but darkness so thick it seemed to absorb the hallway light. And yet he stepped in, drawn like a moth, the air colder in there, heavy with rot, and at the far end, a crib, and inside, not a baby, but a bundle of hair and teeth and eyes, shifting and twitching, and as he backed away, it said his name in a voice made of hundreds overlapping, and the door slammed shut behind him, trapping him in the dark with it, until he woke again, in bed, sweating, breath caught in his throat, and the journal was open again on the table, a new entry written. You stayed. We warned you. Third night, third breath, third soul. You are ours now. He tried burning the journal, but it wouldn't catch, only hissed and smoked, releasing a smell like burning meat and roses, and when he looked out the window, the forest was closer, the tree branches pressed against the glass like fingers trying to get in, the sky wronged. Too red, the moon full though it had been a crescent 2 nights ago, and the third night came like a slow tide, inevitable, and the girl appeared again, eyes still sewn, mouth open now, whispering something he couldn't hear. Until he leaned in, and she screamed it, "Don't look in the mirror." But it was too late. He turned, caught his reflection, and what looked back was not himself, but a pale, grinning thing with too many teeth, eyes black and bottomless, and it reached out from the glass, touched his chest, and pulled, and he fell forward, into cold and screaming and nothing, and when he opened his eyes again, he was standing in the hallway, the mirror smooth again, but he couldn't move, couldn't speak, and as he watched, another him walked past, living, breathing, unaware, wow. He stood trapped behind the glass, banging silently, screaming without sound, and then darkness took him again, time blurring, and he forgot his name, his past, only remembering pain, the feel of being watched, until one day, the door opened again, and another came, another drawn by inheritance or curse or fate, and the journal appeared once more with a new name on it, and Jeremy, who was no longer Jeremy, watched from the glass, screaming silently, as the next soul stepped across the threshold, and whispered, "This place feels familiar." Story 29. I never believed in ghosts until I started working the night shift at Havergate Psychiatric Hospital. It was the kind of place that felt wrong even during the day, mildewed walls, flickering lights, and the heavy stench of chlorine that never quite masked the rot. But at night, it was different. It became something else entirely. The silence wasn't quiet. It was dense, alive, like it was listening. I took the job out of desperation. My mother was sick, bills were stacking up, and the overnight shift paid extra. I figured I'd be dealing with paperwork, checking vitals, maybe calming down a screaming patient or two. No one told me about Ward C. No one told me that sometimes the rooms lock themselves from the inside, or that you can hear scratching in the vents, long, slow, deliberate, as if something is crawling just out of sight. The first week was uneventful. A few schizophrenic outbursts, an elderly man who kept insisting his dead wife was in the mirror. I gave him an Ativan and moved on. But the third night of my second week, I noticed something strange. The chart listed a patient named Malcolm Ridge in room 34, Ward C. But there was no room 34. I checked the layout. It jumped from 33 to 35. Thinking it was a clerical error, I flagged it and moved on. The next night, the name was still there. I asked Dr. Redden about it. He ran the graveyard staff. His face went pale, just for a second, before he laughed and told me it was just a file ghost. A glitch in the system. Don't worry about it, he said. But I could see the lie in his eyes. That night I walked the length of Ward C, 33, 35. The hall was quiet, dim. My flashlight flickered. Just once. I turned to leave, but the temperature dropped. I could see my breath. I heard something soft, rhythmic tapping from behind the wall between 33 and 35. For slow knocks, pause, then 4 more. I pressed my ear to the wall. Behind the drywall, something breathed. Something wet. I reported it. Dr. Redden smiled and told me the building was old, probably rats. Rats don't knock in patterns, I said. He didn't reply. The next night, room 34 appeared. I swear to God. A door where the blank wall had been. Plain metal, rusted at the hinges, the number 34 foot in tarnished brass. My skin went cold. I opened it. The room was empty. Concrete walls. No bed, no furniture, just a single, ancient drain in the center of the floor. The smell hit me first, something sour, metallic. Blood and mildew. The door slammed behind me. I spun, but no one was there. When I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. I banged, screamed. Then the lights went out. I was swallowed by absolute dark. Then came the whispering hundreds of voices, low and desperate, crawling through the black like cockroaches that I don't remember passing out, but I woke up in the hallway. Door 34 was gone again. Dr. Redden called it sleepwalking. Gave me a day off. But I knew better. I became obsessed. I dug through archives, old floor plans, staff records. Room 34 used to exist. It was a solitary confinement chamber, decommissioned after a patient was found dead, ripped to pieces, the walls painted in blood. Malcolm Rich. That was the name. He was admitted in 1963 for dismembering his family. No clear motive, no remorse. Said a voice told him to do it. They put him in room 34 to die. They locked the door and left him there. No food, no water. The record said he stopped screaming after 18 days. They never removed the body. They sealed the room. Tried to forget, but the hospital never let go. Now I saw things. Shadows that moved without light. Faces in the ceiling tiles. I stopped sleeping. I started hearing the knocking even when I was home, always 4 knocks, like the ticking of something ancient. I started dreaming of the drain, of something rising from it on too many limbs. I tried to quit. Dr. Redden begged me to stay. Offered more money, more benefits. "You're strong," he said. "We need someone strong." That's when I realized he knew. They all did. Everyone who worked there long enough either died or went insane. I was being groomed to replace him. The final night, I came prepared. I brought bolt cutters, salt, and a crucifix I hadn't touched since I was a kid. Room 34 was back, waiting. I opened it. The drain was bubbling. Something moved just below the surface, something thick and black and wrong. I poured the salt in a circle and stood in the center, cross in hand. I demanded to know what it wanted. The air turned solid. The voices screamed, and then he rose, not a man, not anymore. Hollow eyes, skin stitched together with wire, a grin too wide, too full of teeth. Malcolm Ridge, or what was left of him. He hovered above the drain like he was born from it, his head tilted like a broken puppet. "You called me," he said. "You opened the door. You let me out." The salt began to burn. My skin blistered. I felt my mind stretching, cracking, like it couldn't hold what I was seeing. I threw the crucifix. It burst into flame in midair. Malcolm laughed. Not a human laugh. Something deeper. Cosmic. Ancient. Then he rushed me. I woke up 3 weeks later in a hospital bed. Not Havergate. A real one. Clean. Quiet. The police found me in the parking lot, covered in blood that wasn't mine. There was no room 34 when they searched. They demolished Ward C 2 days later. Doctor Redden vanished, but I still hear the knocks. 4 at a time. In my walls, in my dreams. Sometimes I see shadows in the corners of my house, standing too still. Waiting. I moved 6 times. Changed my name. Burned everything I had from that place. But it follows. It always finds me. Because once you open the door, it never really closes. Story 30. The things beneath us, I first noticed the cracks when I moved into the house. Not hairline fractures from settling or poor foundation, but wide, deep splits in the walls and floors, jagged like lightning bolts frozen mid-strike. The realtor had nervously smiled and said it was old charm, that the place had character. I should have turned around and run then. It was a 2-story colonial just outside a forgotten town in upstate New York, nestled between dying pine trees and a pond that smelled like rot. It had sat on the market for years. The low price and the quiet drew me in. I was looking for isolation, somewhere to bury grief and peace, and the house seemed to welcome me with open, broken arms. The first night, I heard whispering. I had chalked it up to the wind threading through those strange fissures, hissing like breath through teeth. But as the days passed, the voices became clearer. They didn't speak any language I knew, just syllables strung together like wet, broken glass. I stopped going to sleep at night. I stayed up, pressed against the wall, listening. Eventually, I bought a voice recorder, hoping to catch the sounds, maybe to prove to myself I wasn't unraveling. What I recorded didn't make me feel sane. The whispers turned into moans, then sobs, then gurgles, and then, one night, unmistakably, a voice screaming my name. I tried leaving the house the next morning. I packed my bags and walked out the front door, only to find myself standing back in the kitchen. I tried again and again, each time leaving from a different door or window. It didn't matter. I always ended up back inside. Then the house started changing. The hallway to the guest bedroom stretched longer with each passing night. I would walk to the end of it, and the floorboards would give a little more. The ceiling would lean in a little lower, and sometimes I'd find new doors that hadn't been there before. I opened one once. Behind it was a room made entirely of mirrors. Every surface reflected me, but my reflections didn't move when I did. They stared at me, slack-jawed and twitching, like they were trapped in a moment I hadn't reached yet. I stopped opening doors after that. The cracks began to grow. I would wake up to find sections of the walls completely torn open, revealing nothing but a pulsing, black void beyond. No wood, no insulation, no brick. Just darkness, with things moving inside it. Not shapes, not figures, just suggestions of movement. The sense of eyes without bodies. The impression of claws that never quite came into focus. I heard scratching at night. Not mice or raccoons, but deliberate, rhythmic scratching, like nails dragged across the inside of a coffin. I would lie in bed and feel it beneath me, as if something was clawing its way up through the floor, inch by inch. And the house groaned. Not the lazy creak of wood settling, but the heavy, pained sound of something ancient and dying. I started seeing him 2 weeks and he never knocked. He never announced himself. I would simply turn, and he'd be there, standing at the end of the hallway or halfway up the stairs, watching. He looked like a man, but not quite. His proportions were off, his arms too long, his legs slightly bowed outward like an insect's. His head tilted too far, as if his neck was boneless. And his face was an empty stretch of pale skin, like clay waiting for a sculptor's hands. Every time I blinked, he got closer. I tried to scream once. Nothing came out. The house swallowed my voice. I ran upstairs, thinking maybe I could lock myself in the attic. Maybe the thing wouldn't follow me there. But when I reached the top, the stairs kept going, spiraling higher, impossible levels beyond the roof. Each floor was darker, colder. The wallpaper peeled like burnt flesh, and something wet dripped from the ceilings. I climbed for what felt like hours until I reached a door with no handle. The moment I touched it, I was back in the living room. I don't know how long I've been here now. Days don't seem to pass right. Sometimes I look outside, and the sky is frozen in sunset. Other times, I see stars that don't belong to any sky I know. Giant, pulsing things that watch like gods with bleeding eyes. Food doesn't go bad. Clocks tick backward. My hair doesn't grow. I sleep, but I don't dream. I'm afraid to look at myself in mirrors anymore. I think I'm changing. I think the house is eating me from the inside out. The thing with the blank face comes more often now. He brings others. I see them just beyond the cracks, half-formed things pressing against the edges of my reality, whispering in languages I can almost understand. They promise freedom, but only if I let them in. Only if I peel back the last layers of myself and offer them something pure. Something I no longer have. Sometimes, I think I died when I entered this place. Other times, I think this house found me, chose me. It knew what I lost, what I feared, and it built itself around that grief like a parasite. I've forgotten the sound of my own voice. I write notes to myself on the walls now, but they disappear the next day. The house erases my memories, my past, my name. I've tried to fight it. I really have, but I'm so tired, so cold. The last crack appeared this morning. It runs from the ceiling to the floor, wide enough now that I can see all the way through. There's something on the other side. Not darkness anymore, something white, blinding. I hear voices calling me from within it. Familiar voices. My mother, my brother, even her, the one I lost. They're calling my name, over and over, telling me to come home, but I know it's not really them. The house is ready now. The cracks have become a mouth. The walls are teeth. The floors are flesh. It's waiting for me to take one more step. Just one, and I think I will. Because the real horror isn't what waits beyond, it's that I'm starting to want it. Story 31. They say silence never truly exists in the forest, not even at midnight. Not even when the trees stop whispering and the birds cease their cries. Something always remains, something watching, something breathing. And that was what I heard the night we camped near Black Hollow, a forgotten patch of woods somewhere between Appalachia and Hell, where maps fade at the edges and compasses spin without purpose. And we, for friends who thought ghost stories were for kids and skeptics were clever, hiked in with beer and bravado, all laughter and taunts about curses and disappearances, until the sun bled out behind the trees like a dying animal and shadows stretched too far to be natural. And it was then we noticed the forest had changed, as if every step inward pulled us further from the world we knew. The air thicker, the silence heavier, and then there was the tree, that single gnarled oak dead in the middle of a clearing, carved all over with symbols none of us recognized, deep and fresh and bleeding sap that smelled like iron and rot. And though James laughed, said it was just some hiker's joke, I saw the look in his eyes when the wind passed through the clearing, a wind that didn't move the leaves, but whispered words none of us could understand. And that's when the first scream came, distant but close, human but broken, and we spun to face the woods. But there was nothing, just darkness so thick our flashlights barely pierced it. And even though we'd marked our trail, we couldn't find the path back. The trees shifted, I swear it, like they closed in behind us, trapping us in that cursed circle. And Matt, always the bravest, decided to hike out alone for help, insisting it was just some backwoods prank and we were overreacting. And we watched him disappear into the dark, flashlight bobbing like a dying star, until it vanished entirely. And we waited 3 hours before we heard footsteps returning, but only one set, slow, dragging. And when the figure emerged, we saw Matt's face, pale and stretched with a smile too wide, his eyes glassy like something else wore his skin, and he spoke in a voice that sounded like him and something else layered underneath, saying, "I found it," over and over. And we backed away, but he followed, repeating the phrase with growing urgency until James shoved him and Matt collapsed, still smiling, twitching, then silent. And we ran, blindly, no longer caring about trails, just needing to get away. But the woods didn't let us go. They folded endlessly like a maze, the same dead tree appearing again and again. And then came the others, shadows with limbs too long, eyes glowing faintly red, whispering our names from the branches, from the ground, even from inside our heads. And Emily broke first, screaming and covering her ears, clawing at her scalp until blood ran between her fingers. And she ran straight into the woods and didn't stop even when we shouted. And then it was just James and me, and we did what cowards do. We hid. We found a hollow under a fallen log and lay there for hours, maybe days, because time was broken in that place. Our phones dead, watches cracked, sky unmoving, and we barely dared to breathe. But eventually, hunger drove us out, and we stumbled across Emily, or what was left, not torn apart, but opened, like something had carefully unzipped her and removed the pieces, leaving only her skin draped across the underbrush like discarded clothing. And James vomited, and I wanted to, but I couldn't look away because her eyes were still in her skull, and they moved, following us as we ran again, back to the tree, where we found Matt standing now with others, 5, maybe 6 figures, all smiling, all wrong, all with lips that didn't move when they spoke directly into our minds, asking questions like, "Do you see now? And will you join?" And James answered them, whispering yes. And they touched his head, and he dropped like a puppet cut from its strings, and rose, again smiling. One of them now, and I screamed, I begged, but they turned to me and said, "Not yet." And then I was alone, utterly alone, until I wandered and somehow found the edge of the woods, stumbled into a ranger's station, clothes torn, face scratched, eyes wild. And they didn't believe a word I said, not even when they found the old symbols carved into the tree, just like I described. Not even when they tested the sap and found human blood in the chemical mix. Not even when. The photos of the search party came back with strange shadows in every frame. But I know what happened. I remember the voices. I feel them still, at night mostly, when the wind whispers through the cracks in the wall, and I hear my name in the silence. And sometimes I see James in my dreams, calling me back to the woods, telling me it's my turn to find it. And I try to resist. I really do. But the forest is in me now, and one day soon I'll return, and when I do, I'll bring others, because that's how it spreads, not with death, but with invitation, a whisper passed on, a curse shared, and now you've read this. It knows your name too, and tonight, when the wind blows and your lights flicker, listen closely, and you might hear the trees calling, because it's always hungry, and now it's your turn to see. Story 32. In a quiet town nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, there was an old, decrepit house at the end of a long and winding road. The locals referred to it as the Whistler's House, a name attributed to the eerie sounds that emanated from it at night, much like the gentle, haunting whistle of a distant sower. Legends wrapped around the home like the creeping vines that clung to its battered walls. They spoke of the last family that lived there, the Millers, who disappeared without a trace during a frigid winter. Their absence left the town unsettled, with whispers of strange happenings and ghostly visions surrounding the property. One fog-laden October evening, a young woman named Clara, an avid urban explorer and lover of the supernatural, decided to visit the Whistler's house. Armed with a camera and a flashlight, she felt an irresistible pull to uncover the mysteries contained within the rotting wood and crumbling stone. As she approached the house, the air grew thicker, almost palpable with the weight of unspoken stories. The front door creaked open with surprising ease, as if inviting her into its darkened depths. Inside, the air was stagnant, thick with the scent of mold and decay. Dust motes danced in her flashlight beam, while peeling wallpaper hung limply, revealing layers upon layers of the past. Clara wandered through the house, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She documented her exploration, snapping photographs of the faded portraits that lined the walls, the once grand furniture now cloaked in sheets, and the old, rusted fixtures that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. As she made her way to the living room, she felt a chill creeping up her spine, an unsettling sensation that she wasn't alone. Ignoring her instinct to flee, she pressed on, reminding herself that this was just an old house. However, the deeper she ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. A faint, distant whistle echoed through the halls, a sound so delicate yet so clearly distinct that it sent shivers down her spine. Clara's heart raced, the air grew taut with tension, and an instinctive urge to leave gripped her. Yet, curiosity prevailed. She followed the sound, moving toward the basement door that stood slightly ajar, a gaping maw that seemed to beckon her closer. As she descended the stairs, the temperature plummeted, each breath visible in the air as she cautiously stepped onto damp concrete. The whistling grew louder, now accompanied by an unnerving low murmur that sounded almost like a voice speaking a language she couldn't understand. She fumbled for her flashlight, illuminating the cramped space filled with broken furniture and boxes forgotten by time. The whispering crescendoed, wrapping around her like a cold shroud, and she realized the voice was vaguely familiar, echoing back the names of those lost to the darkness. The Millers. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over her as she recalled the tales of the family's disappearance. Clara turned to leave, but the basement door slammed shut, sealing her in the darkness. Panic surged through her veins as she grappled with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers morphed into anguished cries, the sound rising and enveloping her. Each plea echoed in her mind. Help us. Find us. She was not alone. She could feel the weight of countless souls trapped within those walls, their despair palpable. In a desperate attempt to escape, she turned her flashlight back on, searching for another way out. That's when she saw it, a small, shimmering light at the far end of the basement, beckoning her closer. With hope and fear intertwined, she moved toward it, the whispers turning into an almost cohesive chant, urging her forward. As she approached, the light revealed a small, dusty mirror leaning against the wall. Clara stared into it, and a pang of terror gripped her as she saw not her own reflection, but the faces of the Millers, trapped behind glass, their eyes pleading for release. Clara staggered back, realizing the truth, the whistle, the whispers, they were calling not just to her, but for her to understand their fate. They were warning her. In that moment, realization struck like a bolt of lightning. The Millers had been trapped in the mirror, caught in a limbo between worlds, their essences intertwined with the house itself, feeding off the fear of those who dared to enter. Clara stumbled back, her heart pounding with dread, as the walls began to shift and warp around her. The room felt alive with malice, every shadow twisting, every echo amplifying her terror. Just as she turned to flee, the whispers surged back, now deafening, screaming in a frantic chorus. Stay. Stay with us. Clara grasped the handle again, throwing her weight into it. With a force born of sheer panic, it finally gave way, and she burst through the door, tumbling into the hallway. Adrenaline coursed through her as she raced toward the front door. The voices followed her, now haunting and sorrowful, echoing through the house in a final desperate plea. She burst out into the cold night air, gasping for breath, the moonlight illuminating her escape. Clara didn't dare look back as she sprinted down the path, the whispers fading into the night. She ran until her lungs burned, collapsing at the edge of the woods, her heart still racing. For weeks afterward, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the veil of reality. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but the dreams began to haunt her, night after night, visions of that mirror and the souls trapped inside. Finally, overwhelmed by dread, Clara decided to leave the town. Yet, even in her new city, her heart ached with the weight of those lost souls. She carried the burden of the Millers within her, their whispers a constant reminder. Years later, she returned to lay flowers at the foot of the house, though it was now crumbling into dust. But where she had once felt fear, she experienced sorrow. The stories had intertwined, and she became the keeper of their memories, the Whistler's house forever a part of her tale, haunting her in ways unseen but deeply felt. Story 33. In a small, forgotten town nestled between the dense, whispering woods and a winding river, There existed an old Victorian house that stood silently, casting long shadows on the ground. The townsfolk often spoke of the house in hushed tones, for it had a reputation steeped in sorrow and dread. Children believed it to be haunted, while their parents simply sided with caution, avoiding the house entirely. It was said to have once belonged to the Harrow family, but one fateful night, they vanished without a trace, leaving nothing behind but echoes of screams that seemed to linger in the air like an unfinished symphony. Years passed, enveloped in layers of dust that settled on the floorboards and cobwebs that hung like forgotten memories in the corners. Yet, life continued on, just like the river that flowed steadily, indifferent to the tragedy that lay within the house's dilapidated walls. But in the town's dark history, there were always those drawn to the allure of the unknown, and that allure now called to a young couple, Emily and Jake, who had just moved to the town in search of a fresh start. Unbeknownst to them, the haunting tales that surrounded the Victorian house would soon capture their lives in ways they could never have imagined that on a crisp autumn evening. The couple, driven by curiosity and a growing sense of adventure, decided to explore the long-abandoned house. As they approached, the wind howled, seemingly warning them, but they laughed it off, brushing off the ominous sensation. The house loomed before them, its paint peeling and windows boarded, yet the front door stood slightly ajar as if inviting them in. They exchanged glances filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation before stepping onto the creaking porch, each step amplifying the haunting silence that enveloped the estate. Inside, darkness enveloped them instantly, a thick, stale air that pressed against their skin. They flicked on their flashlights, illuminating dust particles dancing like ghosts in the beam of light. The foyer was grand, despite its decay, with arches that stretched toward the ceiling, adorned with faded wallpaper. As they wandered deeper, the couple found remnants of the Harrow family's existence, framed portraits of somber faces, each with eyes that seemed to follow them, and furniture draped in sheets like forgotten memories covered in shrouds. Suddenly, a whisper echoed from the depths of the house, a sound that sent shivers down their spines. "Did you hear that?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, gripping his arm tightly as they ventured farther into the labyrinth of rooms. The whispers grew louder, distinct now, almost pleading, as if the very walls were soaked in agony. In one of the drawing rooms, they discovered an old grand piano covered in dust, its keys yellowed with neglect. Jake, a music lover, couldn't resist the temptation and sat down to play a haunting melody that seemed to reverberate around the room. As he played, the whispers ebbed and flowed in rhythm with the music, morphing from sorrowful moans to frantic cries. Emily felt a cold breeze brush past her, and turning quickly, she saw a shadow flicker just beyond the doorway. "Did you see that?" she gasped, but the music consumed Jake, who was lost in his own world. Driven by an inexplicable force, Emily followed the shadow into a dimly lit corridor that led to a staircase spiraling downward into the darkness below. The whispers crescendoed, echoing her name, urging her to descend. She hesitated, feeling the weight of an unseen presence, but the intrigue was too powerful to resist. She took a deep breath and followed the echoing calls, not noticing that Jake had stopped playing, a look of confusion stark on his face. As Emily reached the bottom of the stairs, the temperature dropped sharply, and she found herself in a damp, candlelit cellar. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars that held strange, murky contents, and in the center stood an altar made of stone, dark and foreboding. The whispers became frantic now, as if warning her of something. Then, from the shadows, emerged a figure, wretched and twisted, resembling a woman draped in tattered rags, her face obscured by unkempt hair. "Help me," the figure breathed, her voice an echo of the tragic tales that had circulated in town for decades. Terrified, Emily stumbled backward, her heart racing. "No, stay away," she cried, but the figure reached out with bony fingers, pushing past the barrier of fear. "They took my children," she sobbed, her voice raw with anguish that permeated the air. Emily felt the pull of overwhelming sadness, flooding her with the mother's grief that coursed through the cellar like a toxic mist. Above, Jake realized Emily was gone. Panic gripped him. He called out for her, but the only reply was the haunting echo of darkness. Driven by instinct, he followed her path downward, the whispers now turning into screams that seemed to claw at him from all directions. The more he descended, the more the air thickened, suffocating him until he stumbled into the cellar, eyes wide with horror as he witnessed the specter before Emily. "Emily, move!" he shouted, rushing to her side. But the figure's mournful eyes locked onto him, a gaze filled with despair that pierced his soul. "Save them!" she wailed, but all Jake could feel was dread flooding his body as he grabbed Emily's hand and tugged her towards the stairs. But as they turned, the cellar door slammed shut with a deafening thud, sealing their fate. Desperation clawed at them. The shadows danced menacingly, swirling around them as the cries of the tormented echoed in unison. The Harrows, the spirits of all those who suffered. Emily whispered, suddenly realizing the true horror of their surroundings. They were not just intruders. They were now part of a tragedy that transcended time, entangled in the grief of those long lost. A sudden chill enveloped them, and the air electrified as the spirits of the Harrow family materialized from the shadows, their faces contorted in anguish, reaching out towards the couple in a desperate plea for release. "You must help us," they cried in unison, teeth chattering with the flicker of distant flames surrounding them, casting their sorrowful faces in flickering light. The weight of the house's dark history settled upon Emily and Jake. They realized that the only way to escape, but also to free the spirits, was to uncover the truth behind the Harrow family's disappearance. A truth buried deep within the house, intertwined with the very shadows that sought to ensnare them in a frantic race against time. They searched the cellar, uncovering hidden compartments and dusty journals that revealed a tale of betrayal, loss, and unchecked greed that plagued the house when a fortune was promised but never fulfilled, leading the family to darkness, both literal and figurative. As they pieced together the fragments of the Harrows' lives, the air thickened with an electric charge, the very walls seeming to vibrate with anguish, and the whispers turning to wails of despair. Finally, with pieces of the story revealed, they understood what needed to be done, an offering that could allow the spirits to find peace. In a moment of clarity, Emily offered her grandmother's locket, a cherished family heirloom, a symbol of love and protection, her heart aching as she placed it on the altar. A light pulsed from the locket, illuminating the space around them, casting out the shadows that clung to the walls. The spirits hovered closer, and as the locket glowed brighter, the cries of despair transformed into peaceful sighs, the tormented faces slowly morphing into serene expressions, gratitude replacing the pain that had long been etched into their features. Wisps of smoke began to swirl around them, lifting higher and higher, displacing the darkness that threatened to envelop the couple. As the last remnants of the Harrow family ascended into the light, the cellar door swung open with a groan, revealing the flickering daylight beyond. Jake and Emily, exhausted but relieved, stepped into the embrace of the sun, the once ominous house now silent, its curse lifted. As they turned to look back, the air felt lighter, the sun painting the windows with warmth, banishing the shadows that had lurked within in the weeks that followed. As time washed gently over the house, the townsfolk began to share new stories, tales not of tragedy, but of a house that had found peace, a place where laughter could once again echo through its halls. Emily and Jake, forever changed by their experience, shared their story, a reminder that sometimes understanding and confronting our deepest fears could be the key to unlocking the chains of the past, allowing the living and the dead to coexist in harmony, and helping all to grieve, heal, and find hope once more. Story 34. On a stormy evening in a small, secluded town, a woman named Clara found herself drawn to the old, abandoned house on the edge of the forest. Legends surrounded the place, tales of ghosts and dark rituals whispered among townsfolk, yet Clara was no stranger to the lure of the unknown. She held a fascination for the occult and often explored the ruins of forgotten places. That night, the air thick with the scent of rain and decay, Clara decided to investigate the house that had intrigued her for so long. As she approached, the moonlight flickered through the tattered curtains, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance upon the walls. Clara pushed the creaky door open, its hinges groaning like a wounded animal. The interior was dark and musty, filled with remnants of a past life, dust-covered furniture, and faded photographs staring back at her with haunting eyes. The air felt heavy, charged with something unexplainable, and a chill ran down her spine as she crossed the threshold. She made her way through the dimly lit rooms, each step echoing through the silence. The living room held the remains of an old piano, its keys yellowed and chipped. There was a sense of melancholy in the air, as if the house itself mourned its abandonment. Clara felt a strange urge to play, to disturb the silence that enveloped her. As her fingers danced across the keys, a haunting melody filled the space, vibrating through her very soul. She became lost in the music, the notes spiraling into the shadows. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and the melodic flow was interrupted by a voice. "Why are you here?" it whispered, a chilling sound that made her heart race. She spun around, her breath hitching in her throat, but there was no one there. The voice echoed again, louder this time. "Why are you here?" Clara, though terrified, felt an inexplicable pull to answer. "I'm searching for the truth," she said, her voice quivering as she felt the energy of the house shift. The voice responded, "Truth comes at a cost." Desperate to know more, Clara pressed on, asking the voice about the history of the house. With each inquiry, the revelations came like an unraveling thread. The house had once belonged to a family consumed by grief and madness. Tragedies unfolded within its walls, lives lost to despair, rituals conducted in secret, and bargains struck with forces beyond comprehension. The family was said to have called forth something dark, a presence that lingered long after their demise. As she listened, Clara began to see visions, flickering images of the family and their torment. She witnessed the mother weeping over a lifeless child, a father raving mad, and shadows flitting from one room to another, dark figures caught in a never-ending waltz of despair. The more she saw, the more she felt their pain, the anguish sinking deep into her bones until it was unbearable. The air grew heavy, thick with grief, and Clara knew she had to leave, but her legs wouldn't move. It was as if the house was holding her captive, desperate to share its stories, to make her a part of its tragic narrative. "You cannot leave," the voice whispered, now tinged with a menacing edge. "You must understand our suffering. You must join us." Panic surged within her as the shadows began to close in, swirling around her like a sentient fog. Clara finally managed to break free, racing toward the exit with all her might. The door slammed shut just as she reached it, leaving her trapped within the haunted corridors. The shadows whispered her name, calling to her, tempting her to stay just a little longer, to understand the truth in a way that could never be expressed in words. In a desperate bid for freedom, Clara stumbled back into the living room, the piano still standing ominously in the corner. With no other option, she began to play once more. This time, she poured all her fear and sorrow into the notes, crafting a melody from the darkness that surrounded her. The sound filled the room, resonating with the anguish of the spirits trapped within the house. Slowly, she felt their presence begin to shift. The shadows wavered, their grip loosening as they were drawn to the music like moths to a flame. Clara's heart raced as she realized what she had to do. She closed her eyes, allowing the music to guide her, and infused it with a hope that had long been extinguished within the house. The melody transformed, blossoming into something beautiful, something that began to weave through the darkness, breaking the hold the house had on her. As the final notes rang out, the air shimmered, and she felt the shadows retreating, releasing their grasp. With a surge of energy, the door flew open, and Clara dashed outside, gasping for breath as she tumbled onto the damp grass. She turned back to look at the house, its windows dark and foreboding, yet she felt a sense of closure wash over her. The spirits had found their release, their stories set free by the power of her music. Clara returned home, shaken but forever changed. She understood that some truths were too heavy to bear, yet in confronting the past, she had given a voice to the forgotten. For weeks, she carried the weight of the experience with her, and in the depths of her mind, the melodies lingered, a reminder of the darkness that existed alongside the light. With each passing day, she channeled the experience into her art, pouring herself into her piano, creating songs that echoed the tales of the lost and the damned. But sometimes, late at night, she could still hear the whispers, the soft calls of the shadows, beckoning her back to the old house on the edge of the forest. She often wondered if she might someday return, if the truth was worth the price of her peace. Yet, deep down, she knew that some doors were meant to stay closed, some stories left untold, and some shadows destined to remain in the darkness. The echoes of that stormy evening would forever be etched into her soul, a haunting reminder of the fragile line between curiosity and horror, and the unforeseen depths of the human experience. Despite her newfound understanding, Clara couldn't shake the sense of connection to the house and the spirits trapped within it. The melodies she played at night became increasingly haunting, filled with the echoes of sorrow and longing. Each note seemed to carry the weight of the countless souls seeking solace. Clara often found herself in a trance-like state, lost in the music, where visions of the family would occasionally flicker before her eyes. It was both beautiful and terrifying, and she knew she was dancing dangerously close to the edge of the abyss. She began to investigate the history of the house further, digging through records at the local library and speaking with elderly residents who recalled stories from their youth. Tales of the family who once lived there were filled with dread, how they had been the pride of the town until madness seeped into their lives, driving them apart and ultimately to ruin. Clara learned that the mother had been an accomplished musician, a woman whose hauntingly beautiful songs had been a source of comfort to the townsfolk. Yet in her sorrow, she had turned her gift into something dark. Clara felt an odd kinship with her, as if the woman was somehow guiding her still point one day. While searching through dusty old newspapers, Clara found a brittle clipping from decades past. It described a final concert the mother had given, a performance meant to be a celebration but instead turned into a farewell. The article hinted that she had poured her entire soul into the music that night, claiming it drew power from the very foundations of the house. As Clara read on, a chill crept over her. The last line revealed that the mother had vanished after the concert, never to be seen again. Driven by an overwhelming urge to reconnect with the spirit of the musician, Clara decided she needed to return to the house. She had come to understand that she couldn't ignore the lingering pull of the darkness. Rather, she needed to confront it. It was time to finish what had been started. On a moonlit night, with a sense of purpose guiding her steps, Clara made her way back to the old house. Each step felt like a pulse in the earth, reverberating with the history embedded in the very walls. The moment she stepped inside, the air thickened, buzzing with an energy that felt both familiar and alien. It was as if the house recognized her, and the shadows whispered her name once more. This time, instead of fear, Clara felt a determination that burned bright within her. She ascended the creaky staircase to what she remembered was the mother's music room, where the piano still stood, a weary guardian of the past. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight, and she could almost hear faint echoes of the melancholy melodies that had once filled the space. Taking a deep breath, Clara approached the piano and opened the lid. The keys, though aged, felt warm beneath her fingers, as if welcoming her back. She closed her eyes and started to play, pouring everything she had, the sorrow of the mother, the darkness of the house, and her own longing for connection and resolution, into the melody. As she played, the music swelled, and the air around her began to shimmer. It was as though the very essence of the mother was rising, wrapping around Clara like a ghostly embrace. The notes transformed into something ethereal, a bridge connecting Clara to the spirit of the musician who had long been lost. In that moment, Clara felt an overwhelming sense of understanding. She wasn't just playing for the spirits, she was channeling their experiences, their pain, their beauty. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The shadows began to coalesce around her, taking shape until Clara could discern soft, translucent figures emerging, a family in ghostly forms. They gathered around her, their eyes filled with longing and grief. But as Clara continued to play, their faces began to soften, their features illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the window. In her heart, she felt their stories intertwining with her own. Overcome with emotion, she played faster and faster, her fingers flying over the keys, the music transcending despair. The family, once bound by sorrow, began to sway, a silent dance of release and catharsis. Clara could see them remembering happier times, laughter echoing in the house, the warmth of love exchanged, the bliss of life before the darkness. As the final notes resounded in the room, a surge of energy enveloped Clara, and the spirits began to ascend, their voices melding into one harmonious chorus. "Thank you," they whispered, the sound resonating deep within her soul. The weight of an unspeakable burden lifted, and the house itself seemed to sigh, the walls relaxing as if in relief. When the last note faded into silence, Clara opened her eyes, breathless. The house felt different now, lighter, as if a shroud had been lifted. The shadows were no longer menacing. Instead, they flickered gently, a serene celebration of the souls that had found peace. Clara knew they had moved on, liberated by the music that had once chained them. Stepping back from the piano, she felt an overwhelming sense of closure wash over her. Clara had come seeking answers, but what she had found was a profound connection to the past and a reminder of the power of music to heal and transform. The echoes of pain lingered, but they no longer held power over her. Instead, They became part of her own narrative, a tribute to those who had shaped her journey. Clara left the house one last time, her heart lighter than it had been in months. As she walked away, the moonlight cast a gentle glow on her path. She knew her life would be forever marked by the experience, but she was ready to move forward, carrying the souls of the forgotten within her heart. The stories of the house, once shrouded in darkness, now had a new life, one she would honor through her music, ensuring that they would never be forgotten again. Clara emerged back into the world, invigorated and transformed. As she ventured into the night, she resolved to share the love and loss she had encountered, to create melodies that resonated with truth and healing. With dreams of the spirits still swirling in her mind, she knew she would always be connected to that haunted house on the edge of the forest, a place where darkness had been confronted and light had ultimately triumphed. Clara played for the lost and the mourners, for the moments of despair that shaped humanity, and for the beauty that lay in understanding and connection. And in every note she played, a piece of the house lived on, echoing through eternity. In the weeks following her transformative experience at the old house, Clara felt an undeniable shift in her artistic expression. The haunting melodies she had shared with the spirits echoed through her compositions, infusing her music with a raw emotional depth unlike anything she had ever created. Each piece became an exploration of loss, love, and the tenacity of the human spirit, resonating deeply with those who listened. As word of her poignant performances spread, Clara found herself in high demand, invited to play at local restaurants, cafes, and even gallery openings showcasing art inspired by personal narratives. Audiences were enraptured by the stories woven into each note and chord. She no longer felt like an individual chasing fleeting inspirations. Instead, she recognized herself as a conduit for emotions that transcended time, bridging the gap between the living and those who had come before. Yet, as she basked in the acclaim, there lingered a shadow deep within her, an ever-present reminder of the darkness she had confronted at the old house. While she shared her music widely, Clara also began to receive letters from individuals sharing their own grief, loss, and struggles. Struck by the raw vulnerability within these messages, Clara felt compelled not only to celebrate the lightness of life through her music, but also to explore its darker corners. She began to pen a collection of songs that would serve as a cathartic release for both herself and those who heard them, allowing her audience to confront their burdens through her artistry. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, Clara found herself sitting alone in her dimly lit studio, surrounded by sheets of music, the air filled with the scent of old books and the echo of her melodies. It was there that she realized she had been carrying the weight of the spirits not just as a gift, but as a responsibility. With each note she played, she had given them life anew, and now she needed to reach out to those souls who felt isolated in their pain. Transforming her gifts into a lifeline, Clara began hosting intimate gatherings at her home, inviting those who had reached out to her in their moments of darkness. She provided them a safe space to share their stories, to unwrap the burdens they carried, and, in return, she played music that resonated with their experiences. As each individual shared their narrative, Clara found herself swiftly reminded of the countless threads of humanity interwoven through their suffering, each tale a song in its own right. One night, during one of these gatherings, Clara met a woman named Evelyn who had recently lost her father. Stricken with grief, she spoke of her feeling of being adrift, lost in a sea of sorrow. As she listened, Clara felt a sudden and compelling urge to compose a piece that encapsulated Evelyn's pain. The next day, she sat at her piano, and as her fingers glided over the keys, a melody emerged, imbued with the weight of love and longing intertwined with loss. The piece echoed a raw, poignant heartache, capturing every moment Evelyn had expressed. When Clara invited her back to hear what she had created, Evelyn wept at the beauty of the composition, feeling her father's presence linger in the air around them. It was a moment Clara would cherish. She felt as though she had managed to lift a tiny fragment of Evelyn's grief, if only for a moment, reflecting it back to her in an expression of love and remembrance. That winter, Clara decided to take her mission further, incorporating her performances into larger community events that focused on healing through art and music. Each concert began to carry themes of loss and redemption, inviting attendees to not only listen, but to participate by sharing their own stories between songs. The events became a cathartic release for many, providing a sense of connection and communal healing. Clara's name spread beyond the small town. She became known as the musician of memories, someone who helped transform pain into beauty and allowed others to confront their shadows through creative expression. However, as her audience expanded, Clara felt torn. The deeper she delved into the emotional landscapes of her listeners, the more she felt the weight of the spirits she had awakened. It was as though they were calling out not just for acknowledgement, but for resolution. She understood that while music had the power to heal and connect, it could also unearth deeper scars, presenting the past in vivid detail. Late one night, overcome by an urge to return to the house, Clara listened to the stillness of the world around her. The moon was full, and the air was crisp, intoxicating with possibility. She couldn't ignore it any longer. If she was to carry the voices of the lost, she needed to go back to understand what it was that the house still wanted from her. With her heart pounding, Clara traveled to the old house, its silhouette looming against the night sky. It felt different now. The oppressive energy that had once engulfed her was replaced with a sense of longing, a bittersweet nostalgia for the lives that had once filled the space. As she stepped inside, Clara was enveloped by memories and the faint echoes of laughter and sorrow intertwining in the air. She navigated the rooms, finally returning to the music room where it all began. The piano stood silent and patient, awaiting her touch. Sitting before it, she put her fingers to the keys, feeling the vibrations beneath her fingertips. The room was still, but she sensed the presence of the family, as if they were there, watching, waiting. This time, she didn't play just to honor them. Clara closed her eyes and let her heart lead the way, allowing the music to flow, weaving their stories into an intricate tapestry of sound. She played until the sun began to rise, her soul entwined with every essence in the house. The voices of the lost joined her, and together they created an ethereal symphony that bridged the gap between the living and the deceased. Each note rang clear and pure, a conduit for healing, connection, and forgiveness. The music transformed from a melody of sorrow to one of liberation. As the last note dissipated into the sunlight filtering through the windows, Clara felt a wave of serenity wash over her. The house sighed, releasing a delicate warmth that filled the air with light. In that moment, she understood that her journey was not just about transforming grief into music, but also about embracing the full spectrum of human experience, both the beautiful and the haunting. Emerging from the house, Clara was no longer just a musician. She was a storyteller, a curator of emotions, a bridge between worlds. The path ahead seemed illuminated with possibility. Each note she played carrying the spirit of those long gone, merging their tales with her own while resonating deeply through the lives of those she would touch in the future. With clarity and purpose, Clara walked away from the old house, the weight of its stories mingling beautifully with her own. The life of every song, every listener, every spirit intertwined as she embarked on a new chapter, embracing the gifts of both the light and the dark. A reminder that through music, we can find a path to healing, even amidst the shadows. In that dance of melody and memory, Clara knew she would continue to create, always honoring the haunting beauty of the past while charting a way forward. As Clara ventured further into her mission of healing through music and storytelling, she began to cultivate deeper connections within her community and beyond. Her workshops turned into sanctuaries where people shared their most intimate stories, tales of love, loss, hardship, and triumph. Each gathering felt like an orchestra of emotions, notes of laughter mingling with the gentle hum of tears, creating a melody of vulnerability that echoed through the room. At the heart of these workshops was a simple yet profound idea that everyone, regardless of their background, had a story worth telling, and that together, they could weave a narrative that honored their experiences. Clara encouraged participants to express themselves through songwriting, recording, and sharing their pieces in a supportive atmosphere. It was an invitation for everyone to embrace their own voices and feel the collective heartbeat of their community. As word spread about her workshops, Clara began attracting participants from neighboring towns and even cities further afield. People traveled long distances, drawn by the promise of connection and the chance to express themselves through song. Each session became a unique tapestry, with diverse voices coming together to explore themes that resonated universally: the search for acceptance, the weight of grief, the joy of love, and the strength of resilience. One day, during a particularly powerful workshop, Clara met Lily, a middle-aged woman initially hesitant to share her story. Upon learning that her estranged daughter had recently begun to rekindle their relationship after many years, Clara gently encouraged Lily to explore this fragile new chapter of her life through music. It was a pivotal moment for both Clara and Lily, who was apprehensive but eager to embrace the healing power of expression. Over the next few weeks, Lily poured her heart into writing a song about reconciliation, weaving the complex emotions of regret, hope, and love into each verse. Clara found immense joy in guiding her through the creative process, helping her shape the raw emotion into a heartfelt melody. They spent hours laughing, crying, and sharing their own experiences of familial relationships and the often murky waters of forgiveness. The day Lily finally performed her song in the workshop, the air crackled with anticipation. Clara and the others listened intently, the room filled with an embrace of support as Lily stepped onto the makeshift stage. Her voice trembled at first, but as the lyrics spilled forth with honesty and vulnerability, it quickly transformed into a powerful anthem of healing and growth. When Lily finished, the room erupted into applause. But it was the tears streaming down her face that resonated the most. Clara rushed to her side, enveloping her in a warm embrace. "That was incredible," Clara whispered, knowing in her heart that Lily had not only shared her story but had begun a journey towards mending the relationship with her daughter. In the days that followed, Lily reached out to her daughter, sharing the song with her and revealing the emotions that had long been trapped within. It was a breakthrough moment, the music providing a bridge that reconnected them in a way words alone hadn't been able to accomplish. Clara watched as Lily bloomed with newfound confidence, realizing that her voice mattered and could inspire change. As stories like Lily's flourished, Clara felt inspired to take her passion beyond the confines of her local community. She envisioned a traveling series of workshops where she could reach even more individuals seeking healing through music. She began to map out a plan, looking at venues across the region that welcomed hearts willing to share and souls yearning for connection. Simultaneously, Clara's album, Echoes of the Heart, gained traction, garnering attention on local radio stations and social media. She received messages from listeners who had been moved by her music, further solidifying her belief in the power of storytelling and shared experience. It was as if every melody had created ripples, reaching individuals who felt seen and understood through the universality of her lyrics. One evening, after a particularly impactful workshop, Clara received an unexpected email from a well-known musician who had heard her music and was intrigued by her workshops. He extended an invitation to collaborate on a project that focused on mental health awareness through art. Clara was both overwhelmed and excited by the prospect. Collaborating with someone of his stature could amplify the message she had been championing. As Clara prepared for their initial meeting, she reflected on how far she had come from that haunted old house. What had started as a search for inspiration had blossomed into a movement, one that created space for healing, expression, and connection. The day of their meeting, Clara arrived at the recording studio brimming with nerves and excitement. The walls were adorned with gold records, guitars, and every conceivable instrument, a haven for creativity to flourish. When she finally met the musician, she discovered a kindred spirit who shared her vision for using art to foster connection and promote mental health awareness. Together, they brainstormed ideas for a collaborative album that would feature a range of artists, each contributing their own stories and songs that highlighted the importance of mental well-being. The concept would be a fusion of genres, blending Clara's heartfelt storytelling with her collaborators' more contemporary sound. A project that would invite individuals to confront their struggles openly while also celebrating the healing power of music. As the weeks unfolded, Clara and the musician worked tirelessly in the studio, bringing together a diverse group of artists who each had stories of their own to share. The experience was invigorating, as they saw firsthand how music could resonate across different backgrounds, uniting people in their shared humanity. Amidst the collaborative process, Clara began to realize that her role had evolved even further. She was now not only a conduit for healing and connection, but also a facilitator of community. By creating an inclusive space where artists could tell their stories, she was amplifying voices that often went unheard. The album became a testament to resilience, vulnerability, and the indelible strength found in shared experience. The launch of the album was set for World Mental Health Day, an intentional choice that aligned with their mission of advocacy and awareness. Clara organized a concert featuring live performances from the contributing artists, paired with speakers who shared their own personal journeys with mental health challenges. The energy in the venue was electric, the air thick with anticipation and excitement. On the night of the concert, as Clara stood backstage, she marveled at the transformation that had taken place over the past year. The young woman who had once felt lost in shadows was now standing in the spotlight, surrounded by a community of voices eager to share their own truths. In that moment, Clara acknowledged the light within her, a truth that had emerged from the depths of darkness. As she stepped onto the stage to address the audience, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Clara took a deep breath, grounding herself in the shared mission of connection and healing. Tonight, we come together not just as artists, but as storytellers, as a community, she began, her voice strong yet vulnerable. Our stories matter, and through them, we can find common ground and foster understanding. Let's celebrate the beauty of our shared humanity. The night unfolded with an array of performances, each artist pouring their heart into their music, a beautiful cacophony resonating through the venue. Clara joined them, sharing pieces that encapsulated her own journey, a journey that had led her to this very moment, filled with gratitude and a sense of purpose. As the final notes of the concert faded into the night, the audience erupted in applause. But it was the stories shared between the performances, the connections made, and the lives touched that remained etched in Clara's heart. She knew this was only the beginning, a stepping stone towards something greater, a reminder that together, they could confront the complexities of life with grace and courage. In the months that followed, Clara continued to travel, offering workshops and gatherings that invited individuals to share their stories, blending workshops with live performances that celebrated their journeys. Each event became a living testament to the power of music, a reminder that, through shared experiences, healing could emerge. The echoes of the heart persisted, reverberating through the lives Clara touched, intertwining their narratives into a shared tapestry of resilience and hope. She knew that each song she played, each story shared, was part of a larger symphony, an ongoing composition that celebrated the beauty and struggle of being human. As she stood before her piano one evening, looking out at the familiar house that had inspired her journey, Clara couldn't help but smile. In its echoes, she had found her purpose and her voice. What had once been a space of haunting memories had transformed into a home of healing, a sanctuary where the past and present converged, creating a brighter path forward. Clara understood that this journey was not just her own, it was a collective narrative, a legacy that would continue long after the final notes faded. And as she closed her eyes and let her fingers dance across the keys, she felt a profound sense of connection to all the stories still waiting to be told, the echoes of the heart that would forever resonate in the music they created together. It was a beautiful reminder that through love, vulnerability, and shared experience. Story 35. In a small, secluded town nestled deep in the dense forest, there was an old, abandoned asylum. It had been standing for over a century, its walls weather-beaten and its windows shattered, remnants of a time long past. Locals whispered tales of the horrors that transpired within those walls, stories of tortured souls and unethical experiments conducted under the guise of treatment. Over the years, the asylum had become a place of urban legends, a magnet for thrill seekers and ghost hunters, each eager to uncover its secrets, but none daring to stay past dusk. Among them was a group of 4 friends, Emily, Jake, Sarah, and Marcus, all in their early 20s and looking for adventure. The friends had heard the chilling tales and saw the abandoned asylum as the perfect setting for a night of exploration. Despite warnings from the townsfolk, they packed their flashlights, snacks, and a camera, excitement brewing in their hearts as they made their way to the decaying structure. As they approached the asylum, the air grew colder and an uneasy feeling washed over them. The building loomed ahead, its dark silhouette outlined against the moonlit sky. Emily suggested they enter through the main entrance, a set of heavy wooden doors that hung loosely on their hinges. With one final glance at each other, they pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The smell of mold and decay hit them instantly. The once grand lobby was now a shadow of its former self, with peeling wallpaper and rotting furniture scattered about. Dust danced in the beams of their flashlights as they cautiously made their way deeper into the asylum. Their voices echoed through the halls as they joked and laughed, trying to dispel the growing sense of dread. As they wandered through the corridors, they stumbled upon the former patient rooms. Each door was slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse into a past filled with despair. Faded photographs adorned the walls, depicting the faces of those who had suffered unimaginable fates within these walls. Emily shivered as she imagined what horrors the asylum had seen. They soon found themselves in a large common room, its once vibrant atmosphere replaced by an eerie silence. As they set their things down and decided to take a break, Sarah pulled out her phone to capture the moment. "I want to document all this," she said, snapping photos of their surroundings. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows felt alive, creeping closer as the night wore on. After a short break, Jake suggested they explore the basement, a place they all knew was rumored to be the most haunted part of the asylum. Armed with their flashlights, they descended the creaky staircase, the air growing colder with every step. The basement was dark and damp, filled with the echoes of their footsteps. It felt as though something was lurking just beyond the beam of their lights. Suddenly, Marcus pointed to a door slightly ajar at the far end of the room. "What's in there?" he asked. Without thinking, they approached it, curiosity outweighing their fear. As they pushed the door open, a musty smell flooded their senses. The room was filled with old equipment, rusty restraints, shattered medical devices, and a few scattered files that had been left behind. Among the debris, Emily picked up a weathered journal. Its pages were yellowed and frayed, filled with frantic handwriting detailing the torment of patients and the cruel treatments they endured. An unsettling chill ran down Emily's spine as she read aloud about experiments gone wrong and the screams that echoed through the halls. "Guys, we should leave," she said, her voice quivering. But before they could react, a loud crash reverberated through the basement, making them jump. "What was that?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Just the wind, right?" Marcus tried to reassure himself, though his eyes betrayed his fear. But they all knew there was no wind down here. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the palpable sense of something watching them intensified. Out of nowhere, Sarah screamed, pointing towards the corner of the room. There, in the shadows, stood a figure, a gaunt, pale silhouette watching them with hollow eyes. It was only for a split second before it vanished, but the sight left them paralyzed with terror. Then came the chilling sound, laughter, echoing through the basement, echoing off the walls like a repetitive taunt. It was disembodied and chilling, sending shivers coursing through their spines. Fleeing back towards the stairs, they stumbled over each other in their haste to escape. Climbing the stairs two at a time, they burst into the main lobby, hearts racing. They paused to catch their breath, overwhelmed and shaken. "What just happened?" "Did you see that?" Emily exclaimed. But before anyone could find their words, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, slow and deliberate, drawing closer. The friends exchanged terrified glances, their earlier bravado evaporating. As they backed away from the noise, they realized their only escape was back through the same entry they had entered. In a state of panic, they rushed towards the doors, but as they reached for the handles, they found them unyielding, as if the asylum itself had sealed them in. "Let us out," Jake yelled, pounding on the door, desperation creeping into his voice. The footsteps grew louder, now accompanied by whispers that seemed to swirl around them. They were trapped, the specters of the asylum closing in. The shadows lengthened, boiling to life around them, and the once silent halls echoed with the cries of forgotten souls. In their terror, they turned to each other for support, but the darkness had begun to take its toll. Marcus swayed back and forth, his face pale as he murmured about seeing visions in the shadows. Even Sarah, usually the most courageous, collapsed to her knees as paranoia consumed her mind. Finally, Jake found a loose brick in the corner of the lobby and started pounding it against the door. "Just a bit more, we can get out," he shouted, adrenaline fueling his desperation. Emily joined him, flailing against the wood with her fists, while Marcus began to chant under his breath, wavering between reality and hallucination. Just when they thought all hope was lost, the door creaked open, revealing a chilling wind that beckoned them from the outside world. Without a moment to hesitate, they darted outside, sprinting towards the safety of the forest. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the town, the asylum's dark silhouette fading behind them. As they gathered breath, they turned back, but the asylum stood eerily silent, an oppressive presence looming in the darkness. They would never speak of what happened that night, but they each carried the weight of that experience within them, a bond forged in fear and the unknown. The woods remained quiet, hiding the sinister secrets of the asylum, waiting for the next unsuspecting souls drawn into its haunting depths. In the weeks following their harrowing experience at the asylum, the four friends tried to return to their normal lives, but the shadows of that night lingered in their minds, haunting their waking hours. Emily often found herself staring out her window, lost in thought about the ghostly figure and the whispered laughter. Sarah, usually upbeat and spontaneous, had become withdrawn, flinching at sudden noises and avoiding dark places. Jake threw himself into work, trying to bury the memories, while Marcus, once the jokester of the group, was plagued by nightmares that left him restless and anxious. That it was during one of these sleepless nights that Marcus received a text from Emily. The message simple yet potent. "We need to talk." It stirred something deep inside him, and though he felt an aversion to returning to that place, he knew they had to confront what they had experienced together. One by one, the others responded, and they agreed to meet at a local coffee shop the following evening. As they gathered around a table, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken fears. The coffee shop buzzed with life, the warm aroma of brewing beans surrounding them, yet none of it could penetrate the chill that had settled in their hearts. After an awkward silence, Sarah broke down. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine. That night, it wasn't just our imaginations." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of their shared trauma. "I've been having dreams too. Dreams where I go back to the asylum, and it's not just a dream. It feels more like a memory, one that I can't quite remember clearly, but it terrifies me." His voice trailed off as the other three leaned in, their eyes wide with understanding. Emily took a deep breath. "It's almost like it's calling us back. Ever since that night, I felt this pull, like unfinished business. I can't shake it off. I've been researching the asylum, trying to find out more about what happened there." "Ominous stories," Marcus quipped lightly, but his attempt to deflect was met with stern glares from the others. Emily pressed on, undeterred. "No, I found some records about the patients and the experiments. Most were lost to time, but there are a few documented cases that are unsettling. One patient, in particular, was known for her violent outbursts. They say she was possessed. They locked her in that basement room for years, trying to subdue her." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Sarah whispered, "Do you think she was the one we saw?" "I'm not sure," Emily replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But everyone who went near that room reported feeling a dark presence. Some said they heard her laughing. Others claimed she could manipulate minds." A heavy silence fell over the table again. Marcus, who had remained quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Maybe we should go back." The words hung in the air, and a wave of dread washed over them. "I mean, if there's a chance we can put this to rest, it might help. We need closure." "No way," Sarah protested, her eyes wide. "We barely survived the first time. What if it's worse this time?" Jake nodded with her. "We can't go back. Whatever's there isn't finished with us yet." But deep down, he felt the same strange tug Emily described. An insidious curiosity clung to him, and he knew they were all battling the same internal conflict. But it was Emily who finally broke the silence, her resolve clear. "I have to go back. I need to understand what happened to those people and why it's still affecting us." With a hesitant sigh, Marcus added, "If we all go together, maybe we'll feel safer. Strength in numbers, right?" Reluctantly, they all agreed, knowing that this trip was a double-edged sword, one that could either bring them closure or plunge them deeper into darkness. The following weekend, they found themselves driving back to the asylum, each person lost in their thoughts. The atmosphere was thick with apprehension, an electric tension simmering just beneath the surface. As they approached the building, a sense of foreboding enveloped them. The weather was murky, clouds hung low, and the trees swayed ominously in the wind. As they parked and stepped out into the clearing, memories of their previous encounter flooded back. The once inviting door now appeared even more sinister, as if the asylum itself was aware of their return. Taking a deep breath, they entered, flashlights in hand, each beam cutting through the thick darkness that enveloped them. The lobby was as they remembered, frozen in time, holding secrets that refused to reveal themselves. They moved cautiously, the weight of what awaited them pressing heavily upon their souls. This time, they didn't linger in the common room, but headed straight for the basement, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. The descent felt endless, the wooden steps creaking beneath their weight. As they reached the basement, a distinct chill engulfed them, causing their breaths to fog in the air. They flicked on their flashlights, revealing the same oppressive darkness that had haunted them just weeks prior. They approached the eerie room where they had encountered the figure. The atmosphere was thick, pulsating with a tension that made every hair on their arms stand on end. Emily pulled out the journal she had brought, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. "This is where they kept her," she murmured, eyes wide with reverence and fear. This was where the worst of it happened. Suddenly, a low whisper echoed through the room. almost inaudible but unmistakable. "Help me, set me free." The voice sent chills down their spines. They exchanged panicked glances, breath hitching in each of their throats. "Did you hear that?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling now. Emily nodded, terrified yet intrigued. "I think it's her." She stepped forward, staring into the dark corner of the room, drawn like a moth to a flame. "We need to help her." "No." Jake pulled her back forcefully, his voice laced with fear. "We can't trust whatever that is. It's a trap." But it was too late. They never truly understood the depths of their folly. As Emily stood in the center of the room, her eyes locked onto darkness, a figure began to materialize, a silhouette of a woman, her features hidden yet sorrowful. The tortured spirit manifested before them, filling the room with a chilling wind and a palpable sense of despair. "Help me," the spirit moaned, her voice echoing through the attic of their fears. "They locked me away. I am lost." Marcus, unable to control his curiosity, stepped closer, entranced by her mournful gaze. "What happened to you?" he whispered, as if she could hear him. The ghost's sorrow-filled eyes seemed to pierce through him. "They put me here, to die, to forget. Help me find peace." Emily felt compelled to reach out, hands trembling, a feeling of overwhelming sadness washing over her. But before she could take a step further, the door swung shut behind them with a deafening bang, sealing their fate. The once predictable asylum now twisted into something malevolent, its atmosphere charged with rage as the entity in the room shifted, becoming wrathful and powerful. "No!" Jake shouted, regret filling his voice. They were trapped again, swept into a vortex of darkness and despair. The room spun. The whispers grew louder, drowning them in a cacophony of lost souls begging for release. Shadows writhed and swept across the walls, making it near impossible to see, their minds splintering under the intensity of it all. "Run!" Marcus screamed, snapping them from their trance. They bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through them as the walls closed in, topped with the haunting wails of the damned. In a frenzy, they scrambled to find another exit, searching for a way out as shadows encroached upon them. Beside her, Emily struggled to remember the journal's notes. "We have to confront her. It's the only way." But as she spoke, the spirit's features warped, twisting into something grotesque, morphing into a terrifying visage that twisted and turned with rage. "You will not leave. You disturbed our peace." The voice echoed like 1,000 voices layered on top of one another, and the air grew electric with fury. The friends huddled together, the oppressive weight of despair compressing their sanity. With a surge of adrenaline, Emily raced toward the shadowy figure. "I know you're trapped. You don't rest because of the pain they caused you. I can help you." The spirit paused, the anger dissipating momentarily as confusion flickered across its ghastly face. It seemed to waver, torn between rage and the desire for rest. "Help me, free me." In that fleeting moment, the friends formed a circle, their hands clasped tightly together. "We need to say her name," Sarah urged, recalling the notes Emily had gathered. "If she was a patient, she must have a name. We can bring her peace." "Is it too late?" Jake cried as shadows drew closer, threatening to engulf them all. But they clung to hope, channeling their energy toward confronting the darkness. "Catherine," Emily called out, drawing from the depths of the journal's memories. "We know you're here. Catherine, we're here to help." The room stilled, a hush falling as if the spirits paused to hear her words. The figure swayed, indecisive. "Help me find peace." Together, they repeated Catherine's name, their voices powerful and unwavering. They could feel a shift in the air, an energy that pulsed around them, loosening the grip of malevolence that had taken hold. Shadows receded, and the spirit appeared to soften, the sorrow in its eyes becoming clear. "I am lost," Catherine whispered, the pain in her voice palpable. "Your pain is not forgotten," Emily replied earnestly. "We can help you, Catherine. Just find peace. We are here with you." The shadows trembled in response, swirling and turning like storm clouds.